When Alpha Todd Ford rejected me in front of 500 witnesses at the Moonstone ceremony, I did something no rejected mate had ever done in 3 centuries of werewolf history. I laughed. Not the bitter laugh of a broken heart, not the manic laugh of someone losing their mind, the genuine, relieved laugh of someone who just dodged the worst mistake of their life. And when he demanded to know what was so funny, and I said the words that would haunt him for the rest of his existence. Thank you for rejecting me, Alpha. I was wondering how to tell you I already found someone better. The silence that followed was delicious. But to understand why his rejection was the best thing that ever happened to me, we need to go back 6 months. Back to when I was still pretending to be someone I wasn't. Back to when the moon goddess herself assigned me the mission that would change everything. Back to the day I met the wolf who thought he was too good for me and never realized I was investigating whether he deserved to keep breathing. Before we dive into how I destroyed an arrogant alpha's entire world, smash that like button and subscribe if you believe manipulative wolves deserve divine justice. And drop a comment telling me, would you have the courage to laugh at rejection, or would you let him see you break? Let's find out together. Chapter 1. The Assignment. The divine realm smelled like starlight and honey, which sounds poetic until you've spent 3 centuries living there. Then it just smells like work. I stood in the Hall of Eternal Judgment, silver armor gleaming under celestial light, while the moon goddess herself reviewed my latest mission report. My partner leaned against a marble pillar nearby, his dark eyes tracking my nervous finger tapping against my thigh. "Stop fidgeting, Brandy," he said without looking at me. You completed the mission perfectly." "Easy for you to say, Raziel," I muttered. "You're not the one who had to pretend to be a tavern wench for 6 months, while that corrupt alpha tried to—" "Silence!" The moon goddess's voice cut through our banter like silver through silk. She looked up from the glowing report, her ageless face unreadable. "Divine Enforcer Brandy Connor, your work on the Southern Territories investigation was exemplary. Alpha Bernard Decker has been stripped of his position and is currently serving his sentence in the Mirror Realm." I straightened, trying not to preen. 300 years as a divine enforcer, and her praise still made me feel like a puppy getting a treat. "However," she continued, and my stomach dropped. Nothing good ever followed that word. "We have a problem that requires your specific talents." Raziel pushed off the pillar, moving to stand beside me. We'd been partners for 200 years, lovers for 150, and officially mated for 73. The bond between us hummed with his sudden alertness. "What kind of problem, Your Grace?" he asked. The moon goddess waved her hand, and the air shimmered. Images formed in the space between us. Wolves, ceremonies, rejection scenes that made my chest ache with phantom pain. "The Northern Territories," she said. "Alpha Todd Ford, age 32, powerful, politically connected, and according to 17 separate complaints filed with the Divine Registry, a serial mate bond abuser." I leaned forward, studying the images. Todd was handsome in that generic alpha way. Strong jaw, broad shoulders, the kind of calculated charm that made people overlook red flags. But his eyes bothered me. Cold. Assessing, like he was always calculating the value of everything around him. "Serial abuser?" I asked. "How many mates are we talking about?" 6 confirmed rejections, the goddess replied. 3 suspected deaths by suicide in the aftermath. And a pattern that suggests he's not rejecting mates out of fear or incompatibility. Then why? Raziel's voice had gone cold in that way that meant he was already planning someone's punishment. The moon goddess's expression darkened. "We believe he's using the mate bond as a weapon. Identify powerful or well-connected females, allow them to fall in love, publicly reject them to break their confidence, then offer reconciliation. By the time he's finished manipulating them, they've given him access to their family resources, their pack connections, their personal power. Then he discards them permanently." My hands clenched into fists. "And the 3 who died? Couldn't survive the shame of being used and thrown away." The images shifted, showing 3 young she-wolves, beautiful, talented, and dead before their time because some alpha treated the moon goddess's sacred gift like a business strategy. I want him destroyed, I said flatly. I want him reformed, the goddess corrected. Destruction is easy, Enforcer Connor. True justice requires understanding the root of corruption and eliminating it permanently. She waved her hand again, and a new image appeared, a glowing thread that looked like a mate bond, but something about it made my skin prickle. What is that? I asked. A simulated bond, Raziel breathed. You want to test him? The moon goddess nodded. I want to know if Alpha Todd Ford is simply a product of a corrupt system or if he's genuinely irredeemable. To do that, I need to see how he treats a mate bond when he thinks no one important is watching. Understanding clicked into place. You want me to go undercover? More than that. The goddess's eyes met mine. I want you to become his mate, or rather, I want him to think you're his mate. I'll create a simulated bond strong enough to fool him completely. You'll integrate into his pack, allow him to go through his usual pattern, and document everything. And when he rejects her? Raziel's arm moved around my waist, protective. These investigations can take months, Your Grace. You're asking her to endure intentional heartbreak. The simulated bond won't cause her real pain, the goddess interrupted gently. She'll feel the connection enough to make it convincing. But her true mate bond, she gestured at the silver thread connecting Raziel and me, will protect her heart. The rejection will sting her pride at most. I looked at Raziel. We'd been separated for missions before, but never for something like this. Never for something that required me to pretend to fall in love with someone else. How long? I asked. 6 months maximum, the goddess replied. Integrate into his pack, let him initiate the mate bond recognition, document his pattern, and then wait for the inevitable rejection. The moment he rejects you publicly, you'll invoke divine review and bring formal charges. And if he doesn't reject me? The question felt stupid, even as I asked it. The goddess had shown me 6 previous victims. Of course he'd reject me, but she smiled anyway. Then perhaps there's hope for him after all, though based on his pattern, I'm not optimistic. Raziel's jaw was tight. I don't like this. You don't have to like it, I said, turning to face him. But it's the job. The job doesn't usually require you to let some alpha court you while I watch from the shadows. You won't be watching from the shadows. The moon goddess's voice carried a hint of amusement. You'll be stationed in the Northern Territories as my official divine observer, completely separate from Enforcer Connor's investigation. If Alpha Ford is as corrupt as we suspect, having a high-ranking divine commander in his territory will make him nervous. And nervous wolves make mistakes. Raziel looked like he wanted to argue, but 3 centuries of service had taught him when the goddess's mind was made up. When do we start? I asked. Tonight. She waved her hand, and my silver armor dissolved, replaced by simple traveling clothes. You'll need a cover story. I'm thinking a minor pack member from the Western Territories, seeking a fresh start after a family dispute. No obvious power, no significant connections. Exactly the kind of wolf Alpha Ford would underestimate. And then exploit, I said bitterly. Precisely. The goddess moved closer, placing her hand over my heart. Divine energy flooded through me, and I gasped as something settled into my chest. The simulated bond. It felt real enough to be convincing, but hollow compared to the solid, warm presence of my true mate bond with Raziel. There, she said softly. To everyone else, including Alpha Ford, you'll register as an unmated she-wolf. And the bond will activate when you meet him, and he'll feel the pull just as strongly as you pretend to. But remember, Brandy, no matter what he says or does, your real mate is standing right here. Raziel pulled me close, pressing his forehead to mine. 6 months, he whispered. And then we bring him to justice. 6 months, I agreed. I can handle 6 months of pretending to be normal. You've never been normal a day in your life, he said with a slight smile. That's why I love you. The moon goddess cleared her throat delicately. If you're quite finished being adorable, Enforcer Connor has a pack to infiltrate. I straightened, falling back into professional mode. What's my objective timeline? Arrive in the Northern Territories tomorrow. Alpha Ford is hosting a moonstone ceremony in 3 weeks. That's where he typically identifies potential mates. Attend the ceremony, let the simulated bond activate. Oh, and document everything that follows. She paused, her expression growing serious. But Brandy? Be careful. I've investigated corrupt alphas before, but something about this one troubles me. His pattern is too calculated, too precise. Either he's naturally gifted at manipulation, or someone taught him these techniques. You think there's a larger conspiracy? Raziel asked sharply. I think Alpha Todd Ford might be a symptom of a disease we haven't fully identified yet. The goddess's eyes glowed with divine power, which is why this mission is crucial. If we can understand how he operates, we might be able to prevent future alphas from following the same path. I nodded, commitment settling into my bones. This wasn't just about punishing one corrupt alpha. This was about protecting every future mate bond from being weaponized. I won't let you down. Your Grace. I know you won't, child. She smiled, and for a moment, I saw the weight of millennia in her ageless face. You never have. The world dissolved into silver light, and when it reformed, I was standing on a dirt road outside a small village. The sign at the entrance read, "Welcome to Pine Haven, Northern Territories." Behind me, I felt Raziel's presence materialize. He was dressed in the formal robes of a divine commander, dark and intimidating and absolutely magnetic. Had my heart ached with the knowledge that for the next 6 months, I'd have to pretend he was a stranger. "I'll be watching," he said quietly. "Every moment. If he hurts you—" "He won't," I interrupted, "because I'm going to be the best actress he's ever seen. I'm going to make him think I'm exactly what he's looking for. And then, when he rejects me—" I smiled, cold and sharp. "I'm going to destroy his entire world." Raziel's answering smile was equally vicious. That's my girl." He vanished in a shimmer of divine light, leaving me alone on the road to Pine Haven. I took a deep breath, centering myself. For the next 6 months, I wasn't divine enforcer Brandy Connor, mated to the most powerful divine commander in the celestial realm. I was just Brandy, a nobody from nowhere, hoping to start fresh in a new pack. The perfect target for a predator who preyed on vulnerable she-wolves. I started walking toward the village, a genuine smile on my face. And Alpha Todd Ford had no idea what was coming for him. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see his face when he finally figured it out. Chapter 2. The Perfect Target. 3 weeks in Pine Haven, and I'd almost forgotten what it was like to be ordinary. Almost. I'd rented a tiny cottage on the edge of pack territory, taken a job at the local bakery, and spent my evenings pretending to read romance novels while actually reviewing case files on Todd that I'd hidden in a false bottom trunk. And the other pack members had accepted me easily enough. A quiet she-wolf recovering from family troubles wasn't unusual in border territories where wolves came to start over. What was unusual was how quickly I'd identified the rot beneath Pine Haven's pleasant surface. "Another one," my coworker Ida whispered, as we arranged morning pastries in the display case. She nodded toward the window where a young she-wolf walked past, head down, shoulders hunched. "That's Suzanne. She was so vibrant 6 months ago. Then Alpha Ford took an interest, and now—" She trailed off, shaking her head. I'd heard variations of this story a dozen times already. Todd's pattern was even more systematic than the moon goddess had suspected. He didn't just target random she-wolves. He specifically chose ones with something to offer. Suzanne's father controlled the largest lumber mill in the territory. Before Todd's interest, she'd been confident, ambitious, as planning to expand her family's business. Now she looked hollow. "Did he reject her?" I asked carefully, playing the curious newcomer. Ida's expression darkened. Worse. He kept her on a string for months, making promises about mating, getting her father to agree to a business merger, then suddenly decided she wasn't alpha female material. Broke it off 2 weeks before the planned mating ceremony. Her father's stuck in a bad contract, and Suzanne, she sighed. Well, you can see for yourself. My hands tightened on the tray of croissants. 6 months ago, Suzanne would have been laughing, planning, living. Now she was a ghost because some alpha had calculated exactly how to extract maximum value while inflicting maximum damage. That's horrible, I said, and meant it. That's politics, Ida corrected bitterly. Alpha Ford is brilliant, powerful, and destined for great things according to the council. If a few she-wolves get hurt along the way, she shrugged, the pack survives. That's what matters. The door chimed, and Ida's entire demeanor shifted. Good morning, Alpha, she called out, voice suddenly bright and respectful. I turned, and the simulated mate bond hit me like a lightning strike. Todd Ford stood in the doorway, morning sunlight catching his auburn hair and highlighting a face that belonged on recruitment posters for what alphas should look like. Strong features, confident posture, and a smile that probably made unmated she-wolves weak in the knees. The simulated bond flared hot in my chest, pulling me toward him with uncomfortable intensity. I steadied myself against the counter, genuinely startled by how real it felt. The moon goddess hadn't been kidding about making it convincing. Todd's head snapped toward me, his eyes widening slightly. He felt it too. Well, he said slowly, moving closer with predatory grace. I don't believe we've met. Oh, I'm Alpha Todd Ford. He extended his hand, and I noticed how his gaze swept over me, assessing, calculating, pricing me like merchandise. I took his hand, letting my own hand tremble slightly. Playing the overwhelmed nobody was easier when the simulated bond was making my heart race. Brandy Connor, Alpha. I just moved here a few weeks ago. Brandy. He said my name like he was tasting it. From? Western Territories, I replied, using my cover story. I needed a fresh start after some, family complications. His smile widened. This was exactly what he looked for. Isolated she-wolves with no local support network. Easy to manipulate. Well, you've chosen an excellent pack for fresh starts. Pine Haven takes care of its own. Unless they're inconvenient, I thought, but smiled shyly instead. Everyone's been very welcoming. I'm hosting a moonstone ceremony this Friday, he said, still holding my hand a beat too long. It's a pack tradition, the full moon, formal introductions, as a chance for unmated wolves to meet. You should attend. The moonstone ceremony, where he traditionally discovered his mate bonds and began the courtship phase of his pattern. Right on schedule. I wouldn't want to intrude, I said, playing uncertain. Nonsense. His thumb brushed across my knuckles, and I felt the simulated bond pulse in response. His eyes darkened slightly. He definitely felt it too. I insist. In fact, I'd be honored if you'd save me a dance. Behind the counter, Ida's expression had gone carefully neutral, but I caught the flash of pity in her eyes. She thought I was about to become Todd's next victim. She had no idea I was about to become his worst nightmare. I'd like that, Alpha, I said softly. Todd, he corrected with a charming smile. We're not formal here, Brandy. At least, not among friends. He released my hand, ordered coffee and pastries with easy confidence, and left with a final smile that was probably meant to be reassuring, but felt calculated instead. The moment the door closed, Ida grabbed my arm. Listen to me very carefully, she said urgently. Whatever you just felt, that pull, that connection, ignore it. What do you mean? I've seen that look on his face before. Her grip tightened. 6 times before, to be exact. He's interested, Brandy, and when Alpha Ford becomes interested in a she-wolf, it never ends well. I let concern show on my face. But the mate bond... Doesn't matter, she interrupted. Trust me, whatever he's offering, the price is higher than you want to pay. This was valuable intelligence. Pack members warning newcomers meant Todd's pattern was well known enough to generate protective instincts, yet he continued operating with impunity. Either he was protected by higher authorities, or the benefits he brought to the pack outweighed the collateral damage of broken she-wolves. I appreciate the warning, I said carefully. But maybe I'm different? Ida's laugh was hollow. That's what they all think, honey. That's what they all think. The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparations. I reported to Raziel each night through our private bond link, careful to only communicate when I was alone in my cottage. He took the bait I sent on Tuesday night. A moonstone ceremony this Friday. He's already started the charm offensive. Are you safe? Raziel's presence in my mind was warm, concerned, and deeply unhappy with this entire mission. Completely. The simulated bond is working perfectly, strong enough to be convincing, but hollow compared to ours. It's like the difference between candlelight and the sun. Poetic, he sent back with dry amusement. I'm positioned at the Northern Council Hall as official divine observer. If you need me, I know. I smiled, as even though he couldn't see it. 6 months, remember? I can handle one arrogant alpha. It's not him I'm worried about. It's the system protecting him. That was the real question, wasn't it? How had Todd operated for years with 6 confirmed victims and 3 suspected deaths without facing consequences? Someone was shielding him. We just had to figure out who and why. Friday arrived with perfect ceremony weather. Clear skies, warm evening, and then a full moon rising over the Pack Commons, where Todd had arranged an elaborate outdoor celebration. Lanterns hung from trees, tables groaned under feast preparations, and unmated wolves circulated with the nervous energy of people hoping tonight would change their lives. I dressed carefully, nice enough to fit in, but not so elaborate that I'd stand out. The goal was to be memorable to Todd while remaining forgettable to everyone else, the perfect target. "Oh, Brandy!" a familiar voice called out, and I turned to find Holly McGrath, another bakery coworker, waving me over. "You look beautiful. Come meet some people." She introduced me to a cluster of young wolves, and I fell easily into small talk while keeping one eye on Todd. He worked the crowd with practiced ease, stopping to chat with important pack members, accepting congratulations on the ceremony's success, and somehow making everyone feel like they had his complete attention. He was good, dangerously good. The mate bond pull intensified as the moon rose higher, and I watched Todd's eyes track across the commons until they found me. He smiled, excused himself from his current conversation, and started in my direction. "Here we go," Holly whispered. "He's coming over." "Is that bad?" I asked innocently. "That's complicated," she replied, then plastered on a bright smile as Todd reached our group. "Ladies," he said warmly, as nodding to Holly and the others before his attention settled on me. "Brandy, you came." "You invited me," I replied with a shy smile. "I wouldn't miss it." "Walk with me?" He extended his arm, and I took it, feeling the simulated bond sing with false recognition. Around us, I noticed pack members watching with expressions ranging from excitement to concern to resignation. They knew. They all knew what happened to she-wolves who caught Todd's attention, and they were powerless to stop it. We walked toward the edge of the commons where it was quieter, away from the music and laughter. The moon hung heavy and full overhead, bathing everything in silver light. "Can you feel it?" Todd asked quietly. "The bond?" I let myself tremble slightly. "Is that what this is? I'm not experienced with mate bonds." His smile widened. I'd just confirmed I was as naive as he hoped. "It's rare," he said. "The moon goddess doesn't grant these connections lightly. When you feel this pull, this recognition." He stopped walking, turning to face me with an expression of wonder that would have been touching if I didn't know it was performance. "It means something, Brandy." "What does it mean?" I asked, playing the hopeful innocent perfectly. "It means," he said, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, "that perhaps the moon goddess brought you to Pine Haven for a reason." The simulated bond pulsed, and I let him see the effect in my eyes, the dilation of pupils, the catch in my breath, all the physical signs of attraction that he was expecting. "I came here to start over," I whispered. "I never expected to find this." "Neither did I," he lied smoothly, "but I'm grateful for it." He leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away, and when I didn't, he kissed me. It was technically proficient, he'd clearly practiced, but completely empty. Like kissing a beautiful statue. The simulated bond tried to convince me it meant something, but underneath, and I felt nothing but cold assessment. When he pulled back, his eyes searched my face. "Stay close to me tonight," he said. "I want to introduce you to some people, important people." And there it was, the beginning of his pattern. Public acknowledgement of the bond, integration into his social circle, making me visible enough that the eventual rejection would carry maximum humiliation and impact. "I'd like that," I said, letting adoration bleed into my voice. We returned to the celebration, and Todd was true to his word. He introduced me to council members, business leaders, influential pack families. Each introduction was carefully calculated. He positioned me as someone he was seriously considering, making sure everyone knew we were bonded, building the narrative that would make the rejection devastate my social standing when it came. Across the commons, I caught a glimpse of Raziel in his divine commander robes, ostensibly observing the ceremony as part of his official duties. Our eyes met for the briefest moment, and I felt his fury through our real bond. Watching me play the smitten fool with another male was killing him. "It's not real," I sent through our private link. "None of it is real." "I know," he sent back tightly. "Doesn't make it easier to watch." I forced my attention back to Todd, who was explaining pack politics to me with the patient air of someone educating a child. He thought I was absorbing every word with wide-eyed fascination, as I was actually cataloging every manipulation technique, every subtle put-down disguised as teaching, every way he positioned himself as my superior while making me grateful for his attention. By the end of the evening, I'd been thoroughly integrated into his world. Pack members now knew me as Todd's mate. Though no official announcement had been made, I'd been introduced to his inner circle, who'd assessed me with the same calculating eyes as their alpha. And I'd successfully played the role of the overwhelmed nobody who couldn't believe her good fortune. "Let me walk you home," Todd said as the ceremony wound down. "You don't have to. I want to." His hand settled on the small of my back, possessive. "Besides, we should talk about what happens next." We walked through quiet streets toward my cottage, and Todd outlined his expectations. "The bond needs time to strengthen," he explained. "We'll court properly, dinners, pack events, yet getting to know each other. I want to make sure we're compatible before making any permanent decisions." Translation. He needed time to identify what he could extract from me and to break down my confidence until I'd give him anything he wanted. "Of course," I agreed. "I want to do this right." "Good." We'd reached my cottage, and he smiled down at me. "You're special, Brandy. I felt it the moment you walked into that bakery. I think you might be exactly what I've been looking for." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, so utterly convincing that if I'd actually been the person I was pretending to be, I would have melted. Instead, I smiled adoringly and said, "I hope so." He kissed me goodnight, another technically perfect but emotionally empty performance, and walked away whistling. I waited until he was out of sight, then entered my cottage and locked the door. The moment I was alone, and I pulled out my hidden case files and began documenting everything. Every word, every gesture, every calculated move. A soft shimmer of light announced Raziel's arrival. He appeared in my living room, still in his divine commander robes, face tight with barely controlled emotion. "Tell me you're okay," he demanded. "I'm perfect." I moved into his arms, letting the real mate bond wash away the hollow feeling the simulated one left behind. "He's following the pattern exactly. 6 months from now. I'll have enough evidence to not just charge him, but to dismantle whatever system has been protecting him." 6 months of watching him touch you, Raziel said quietly. 6 months of pretending you're his. 6 months of him thinking he's winning, I corrected, while I document every crime, every manipulation, every wolf he's destroyed. And then? I smiled against his chest. Then I get to watch his face when he realizes he didn't seduce a nobody, and he courted his own destruction. Raziel's arms tightened around me. "Promise me something. Anything. promised me that when this is over, when he's brought to justice and the mission is complete, we take a century off. Just us. No investigations, no corrupt alphas, no saving the world. Just us. I pulled back enough to look up at him. A century sounds perfect. He kissed me then, and the difference between his kiss and Todd's was the difference between sunlight and shadow. Real, warm, alive. When we finally pulled apart, I was smiling. 6 months, I said. I can endure anything for 6 months. 6 months, he agreed. And then that arrogant alpha learns what happens when you mistake a divine enforcer for prey. He vanished in a shimmer of divine light, leaving me alone with my case files and my thoughts. Outside, the moon hung full and bright overhead. The moon goddess watching, waiting, trusting me to bring justice to the wolves Todd had destroyed and the ones he planned to destroy next. I pulled out a fresh page and began writing. Day 1 of official investigation. Subject has taken the bait. Pattern recognition confirmed. Proceeding to Phase 2. Courtship and intelligence gathering. Predicted rejection timeline. 4 to 6 months. Evidence collected. Initial manipulation tactics. Public bond acknowledgement for maximum future humiliation impact. On possessive behavior establishing control. Personal assessment. Subject is skilled, confident, and utterly convinced of his superiority. He has no idea he's being investigated. Recommendation: proceed with caution. This alpha is more dangerous than previous targets. I closed the file and looked out the window at the peaceful town of Pine Haven, where broken she-wolves walked with hollow eyes, and no one stopped the predator in their midst. Not yet. But soon, very soon, an alpha Todd Ford would learn that the moon goddess didn't just create mate bonds, she also created wolves like me to protect them. Chapter 3. The pattern emerges. 2 months into the courtship, and I had enough evidence to fill 3 case files. Todd was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He'd started with grand gestures, expensive dinners, public displays of affection, introducing me to every influential wolf in the Northern Territories. Everyone now knew me as Todd's mate, though he'd been careful never to make it official, always keeping one foot out the door. Then came the subtle erosion. You know, "Oh, Brandy," he said over dinner at the Territory's finest restaurant, "that dress is lovely, but perhaps something more sophisticated next time. When you're with me, people notice. We want to make the right impression." I'd smiled and nodded, making note of control tactic number 47, criticism disguised as helpful advice. 3 days later, "I love how enthusiastic you are about pack politics, sweetheart, but maybe let me handle the complicated discussions. You're still learning how things work here." Control tactic number 48, intellectual diminishment masked as protection. A week after that, "I noticed you've been spending time with Ida and Holly from the bakery. They're sweet girls, but not really our caliber anymore. Perhaps you should cultivate friendships with the council members' mates instead." Control tactic number 49, social isolation presented as social climbing. Each suggestion was delivered with that warm, concerned smile, and each one designed to make me smaller, more dependent, more willing to reshape myself into whatever he needed. And I played along perfectly, watching him relax as he mistook my compliance for genuine submission. What Todd didn't know was that every lunch with Ida and Holly was an intelligence gathering session. Every innocent question I asked pack members was extracting pieces of his history. Every moment he thought I was being a good little mate, I was building a case that would bury him. "Well, he's done this before, hasn't he?" I asked Ida one afternoon at the bakery. We were alone in the back room, and I'd carefully positioned the conversation to seem like worried suspicion rather than investigation. "The way he's changing me, making suggestions about how I dress, who I talk to, what I say." Ida's expression went carefully neutral. "Oh, what makes you ask that?" "Because Suzanne warned me yesterday." That was true. The hollow-eyed she-wolf had pulled me aside at the market with desperate urgency. She said Todd did the same thing to her, started wonderful, then slowly made her feel like she needed to be someone else to deserve him. And then he rejected her anyway, Ida finished quietly. "Yes, that's his pattern." "How many?" I asked, letting my voice shake. "How many others were there?" Ida sighed, and glancing toward the front of the bakery to make sure we were still alone. 6 that I know of personally, probably more before I moved here 5 years ago. 6, I repeated, genuine anger bleeding into my tone. And no one stopped him? How? Ida spread her hands helplessly. He's the alpha, Brandy. Powerful, politically connected, brings prosperity to the pack. And technically he's not breaking any laws. Courting someone and then deciding they're not compatible isn't a crime. But the way he does it is cruel, manipulative, and destroys she-wolves' confidence. I know. Ida's voice was bitter. But cruelty isn't illegal. The council sees 6 rejected courtships, not 6 broken wolves. They see an alpha who's selective about his mate, not a predator who's systematically destroying females for profit and power. I filed that information away, as the council's complicity, whether through ignorance or willful blindness, was part of the system protecting Todd. They benefited from his political acumen and economic contributions enough to overlook the collateral damage. What happened to them? I asked. The 6 he rejected? Ida's expression darkened. Suzanne you've met, she's a shadow of who she was. Melinda moved to the Eastern Territories to escape the shame. Blanca threw herself into her family business and refuses to even look at males anymore. Paige, she paused. Paige tried to end her life. She survived, barely, and now lives with her parents under constant supervision. My hands clenched. 4 she-wolves accounted for. And the other 2? Jamie and Isabel. Ida's voice dropped to barely a whisper. They didn't survive. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. What happened? Jamie walked into the forest one night and never came back. They found her body 3 days later at the base of Widow's Cliff. Official ruling was accidental fall. Ida's eyes were hard. But she left a note that her family burned before the council could see it. And Isabel? Overdose on sleeping medication, 6 months after Todd's very public rejection at the spring equinox celebration. Ida's voice was flat, reciting facts to keep emotion at bay. She'd given Todd access to her family's mining operation through a business deal his lawyers drafted. And after the rejection, her family was locked into a contract that gave Todd 60% of the profits. Isabel blamed herself for being too trusting. I felt sick, and it wasn't acting. 2 dead she-wolves, 4 destroyed ones, and Todd just kept operating, kept hunting, kept destroying lives while the pack looked away. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Ida met my eyes directly. Because you seem like someone who might actually fight back. The others, they loved him, really loved him. By the time he was done breaking them down, they couldn't imagine standing up for themselves. She gripped my hand. But you've got something different in your eyes, Brandy. Like you're not quite as fooled as you pretend to be. I was impressed despite myself. Ida was more perceptive than I'd given her credit for. I don't know what you mean, I said carefully. Yes, you do. She squeezed my hand once, then let go. Just be careful. And if you do decide to fight back, make it count. Make sure he can't do this to anyone else. That evening, I had dinner at Todd's estate, a sprawling mansion that screamed wealth and power. He'd been building toward something for weeks, and I suspected tonight was when he'd make his move to the next phase. I was right. I've been thinking, Todd said over dessert, his tone casual but his eyes calculating, about us, about our future. I set down my fork, giving him my full attention. Yes? The mate bond between us is strong, Brandy. Undeniable. He reached across the table to take my hand. But I'm an alpha. I have responsibilities to the pack, political obligations, expectations to manage. Here it came. The setup for eventual rejection, wrapped in concern about duty and responsibility. I understand, I said softly. Do you? He studied my face. Because I need to know you're serious about this, about being an alpha's mate. It's not easy. There are sacrifices, compromises, changes you'd need to make. What kind of changes? Well, for instance, he gestured vaguely. Your job at the bakery. It's charming, but not really appropriate for an alpha's mate. You'd need to step into a more visible role, charity work, council events, social leadership. Translation: quit your job so you're financially dependent on me. That makes sense, I agreed, and your living situation. He smiled warmly. That cottage is quaint, but you should move into the estate. Now we should be together, really get to know each other without the barrier of distance. Translation: isolate you from your support system and put you under my constant supervision. Move in with you? I let uncertainty show. That's a big step. Only if you're serious about us, he said, and there was the edge beneath the warmth. If you're not ready for that level of commitment, perhaps we should reconsider whether this bond is as strong as we thought. The threat was delicate but clear. Comply or face rejection. I let him see me waver, then slowly nod. You're right. If we're going to do this properly, I should commit fully. When would you want me to move in? His smile widened. I'd passed another test. This weekend? I'll send pack members to help with your things. This weekend, I agreed, my mind already racing through implications. And moving into his estate would give me access to his private files, his business dealings, his personal correspondence. It was a risk, harder to maintain my cover under constant proximity, but the intelligence value was enormous. There's one more thing. Todd's thumb traced circles on my palm. I need you to sign some documents, standard pack integration paperwork for mates moving into alpha housing, liability waivers, resource usage agreements, that sort of thing. Every alarm bell in my divine consciousness started ringing. What kind of resource usage agreements? Oh, just formalities. He waved dismissively. If you're living in the estate using pack resources, there need to be official records. And if things don't work out between us, he paused delicately. Well, we want to make sure there are no messy financial entanglements. There it was, as the contract that would give him legal claim to anything I brought into the relationship while protecting his own assets. The same contract that had trapped Suzanne's father in that exploitative lumber deal. The same type of agreement that had cost Isabel's family their mining operation. That seems reasonable, I lied. Should I have a lawyer review them? If you'd like, though it's really not necessary. His tone was just slightly cooler. Unless you don't trust me? The subtle accusation. Doubt him, and prove you're not committed to the relationship. No, of course I trust you. I squeezed his hand. I'll sign whatever you need. His warmth returned immediately. Excellent. I'll have my lawyer prepare the documents. We'll make it official this weekend when you move in. I smiled adoringly while mentally cataloging this as evidence item number 157, predatory contract designed to exploit mate bond for financial gain. We finished dinner with Todd outlining his vision for our future. A future that involved me becoming progressively smaller, quieter, and more dependent, while he absorbed whatever value I could provide before the inevitable rejection. When he walked me to the door, he kissed me with the same technically proficient but emotionally empty passion I'd grown accustomed to. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, he murmured against my hair. Some of my previous relationships, and ended badly because the females couldn't handle the realities of being with an alpha. But you're different, Brandy. You understand what's required. I just want to make you happy, I said, and watched his ego expand at the submission in my tone. The moment I was back in my cottage, I contacted Raziel through our bond. He's accelerating the timeline, I sent. Wants me to move into his estate this weekend and sign predatory contracts. Raziel's response was immediate and furious. Absolutely not. That's too dangerous. It's perfect, I countered. Access to his private files, ability to document everything, and he's so confident right now that he's getting sloppy. He practically admitted to previous relationships ending badly. That's the closest thing to a confession we've gotten. Brandy, I can handle this. I pushed reassurance through our bond. 2 more months maximum. He'll reject me right before whatever major event he's planning, probably the summer solstice celebration. Public humiliation for maximum impact, just like his pattern. I'll have the contracts he makes me sign, testimony from previous victims, and documentation of his entire operation. And if something goes wrong, then my divine commander mate materializes and reminds everyone why they should fear celestial justice, I sent with grim humor. But it won't come to that. Todd is so convinced he's smarter than me. He has no idea he's building his own cage. I felt Raziel's reluctant acceptance through our bond. 2 months, then we end this, mission complete or not. Deal. After he disconnected, I pulled out my case files and began documenting the evening. Every manipulation tactic, every contract clause designed to exploit vulnerable she-wolves, every piece of evidence that would prove Todd wasn't just a cruel alpha. He was a systematic predator who'd weaponized the sacred mate bond for personal gain. Tomorrow, I'd pack my few possessions and move into the estate. I'd sign whatever predatory contracts his lawyers prepared, making sure to get copies for evidence. I'd play the devoted mate while cataloging every crime. And in 2 months, when Todd stood in front of the pack to publicly reject me, confident that he'd broken another she-wolf and expanded his power, I'd reveal exactly who and what I was. I'd invoke divine review with 300 years of enforcer authority. And I'd make sure that every wolf he'd destroyed got to watch him face justice. Outside my window, the moon was waning toward dark, but in 2 months, it would be full again. Full and bright and perfect for the goddess's justice to finally come down on Alpha Todd Ford's arrogant head. I smiled and kept writing. The predator had no idea he was already caught in the trap. He just hadn't felt it close yet. Chapter 4. Inside the Wolf's Den. Moving into Todd's estate was like walking into a museum dedicated to his own greatness. Every wall displayed awards, commendations, and photographs of Todd with various dignitaries. His office contained enough leather-bound books on leadership and strategy to stock a library, all arranged for maximum visual impact. Even the guest rooms, now being converted into our shared space, were decorated in a style that screamed successful alpha rather than comfortable home. "What do you think?" Todd asked, watching me survey the master bedroom with its enormous 4-poster bed and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the territory. "It's incredible," I said honestly. It was incredible, incredibly impersonal. It's like a hotel suite designed by someone who'd read about intimacy in a textbook but never actually experienced it. "I'm glad you approve." He wrapped his arms around me from behind, and I felt the simulated bond pulse weakly. 2 months of constant exposure had worn down even the goddess's artificial creation. It still fooled Todd, but I barely felt it anymore. "I want you to be comfortable here. This is your home now. Your home that you'll be thrown out of the moment you're no longer useful," and I thought, but leaned back against him with a content sigh. "Your lawyer sent over the documents," I said carefully. I looked through them, and there's a clause about financial contributions that I didn't quite understand. I'd understood it perfectly. The clause stated that any gifts, investments, or resource allocations I made during our courtship would remain Todd's property in the event of relationship dissolution. It was the same clause that had trapped Isabel's family in that mining contract. "Oh, that's just standard protection," Todd said smoothly. "You don't have any significant assets, so it doesn't really apply to you. It's more about preventing gold diggers from trying to claim pack resources if things don't work out." The casual dismissal of my worth, as the assumption that I had nothing valuable to offer, it was perfectly calculated. Make me feel grateful that he wanted me despite my supposed inadequacy. "That makes sense," I said, pulling out the signed documents from my bag. "I trust you completely." His smile was triumphant. "I knew you would. You're not like the others, Brandy. You understand what's really important." He took the contracts, and I watched him file them away in his office safe, noting the combination as he input it. Evidence secured, access to his private documents confirmed. Phase 3 of the investigation was officially underway. Living with Todd revealed layers of his operation I'd never have discovered from outside observation. His business meetings were actually coordination sessions with other alphas who use similar mate bond exploitation tactics. I documented 3 separate conversations where they shared strategies for identifying optimal targets, their term for vulnerable she-wolves with exploitable resources. His charity work was a carefully constructed public image designed to make him look benevolent while actually funneling pack resources into his private investments. The paperwork was brilliantly designed, technically legal, but ethically bankrupt. And his treatment of PAC members when he thought no one important was watching revealed the truth beneath his charming facade. Servants were dismissed for minor infractions. Wolves who questioned his decisions found themselves demoted or reassigned to undesirable positions. Anyone who posed even a minor threat to his authority was systematically destroyed through social manipulation and political maneuvering. I documented everything. Hidden recording devices planted throughout the estate, capturing conversations that would make the Divine Council's collective hair stand on end. But it was what I discovered in his private files that turned my stomach. He kept journals, detailed accounts of each relationship he'd cultivated, complete with assessments of what he'd gained and what he'd learned for next time. Melinda, mining rights secured, but rejection timeline too rushed. She became hostile rather than broken. At note, allow more time for dependency to develop before termination. Page, excellent emotional manipulation, complete resource extraction, but suicide attempt created unnecessary publicity. Note, better monitoring of mental state post-rejection to avoid messy outcomes. Jamie, total success. Family timber rights secured, she-wolf completely destroyed, minimal PAC sympathy. Cliff death ruled accidental. Perfect template for future terminations. And he'd called Jamie's death a perfect template. My hands shook as I photographed each page with the divine crystal I'd hidden in my necklace. This wasn't just predatory behavior. This was premeditated destruction of she-wolves, refined through practice until he'd perfected the art of breaking them. Brandy? Todd's voice from the doorway made me jump. What are you doing in my office? I'd been so focused on the journals I hadn't heard him approach. Fatal mistake for an undercover investigator. I was looking for paper, I said quickly, letting nervousness show. I wanted to write a letter to my family in the Western Territories, and I didn't want to bother you while you were in your council meeting. He studied me for a long moment, and I felt the weight of his assessment. Was I a threat? Had I seen something I shouldn't have? Then his expression softened into indulgent amusement. Sweetheart, you don't need to sneak around. If you need something, just ask. He moved closer. And I noticed he positioned himself between me and the desk where his journals lay open. But perhaps use the study down the hall for personal correspondence. This office contains sensitive PAC business. Of course. I moved toward the door, then paused. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to invade your privacy. No harm done. But his eyes were cooler now, more watchful. Just remember, some spaces are mine alone. Respect those boundaries and we'll be fine. The warning was clear. I'd overstepped, and then he was reminding me of my place. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the study, actually writing a meaningless letter to a fictional family while my mind raced. Todd was getting suspicious. I needed to be more careful, or he'd accelerate his timeline to cut his losses. That evening, Raziel appeared in my room while Todd was out at another council meeting. His divine commander robes were gone, replaced by casual clothes that made him look almost normal. Almost. Yeah, you're taking too many risks, he said without preamble. Todd caught you in his office? I got careless. I moved into his arms, letting the real mate bond soothe the lingering tension. But I got photographs of his journals. Raziel, they're worse than we thought. He's not just exploiting she-wolves, he's studying them, refining his techniques. Jamie's death wasn't accidental. He planned it. Raziel's arms tightened around me. That's premeditated murder. It is. Helen, I have proof. I pulled back to look at him. 2 more weeks, that's all I need. The summer solstice celebration is in 14 days, and based on his pattern, that's when he'll make his move. Public rejection, maximum humiliation, and then I invoke divine review with enough evidence to not just strip him of power, but bring criminal charges. 14 days, Raziel repeated. And you're sure you're safe until then? He needs me cooperative for whatever he's planning. I'm safer now than I'll be after the rejection. I paused. There's something else. He's been introducing me to other alphas who use similar tactics. This isn't isolated to Todd. It's a network. Raziel's expression went deadly. A conspiracy. A culture. I corrected. They're teaching each other how to exploit the mate bond system, sharing strategies, celebrating successful manipulations, treating she-wolves like resources to be harvested. I pulled up the hidden files on my crystal device. So I have names, dates, confirmed victims across 5 territories. This is bigger than one corrupt alpha. This is systemic abuse that's been normalized by the wolves benefiting from it. He studied the evidence, his face growing darker with each entry. The moon goddess needs to see this immediately. Not yet. I closed the files. If we move now, we only get Todd. The others will scatter, destroy evidence, and we'll never get another chance at a coordinated takedown. But if we wait until after Todd's public rejection, when he's confident and careless, we can move against all of them simultaneously. You want to use yourself as bait to draw out an entire conspiracy, Raziel said flatly. I want to make sure that when the moon goddess brings judgment, it's comprehensive enough that this never happens again. I met his eyes. 14 days, Raziel. Then we end all of it. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. 14 days. But I'm increasing surveillance. Any sign that you're in immediate danger, you'll intervene, I finished. I know. He kissed me then, fierce and possessive and full of barely controlled worry. I love you, he said against my lips, and I'm going to enjoy watching you destroy them all. I love you too, I smiled. And I'm going to enjoy the look on Todd's face when he realizes he didn't seduce a naive she-wolf, but he courted divine retribution. The next 2 weeks passed in a careful dance of continued deception and evidence gathering. Todd ramped up his control tactics, criticizing my clothing choices, my conversation topics, even how I laughed at pack events. Each criticism was documented, each manipulation cataloged. He also started talking about our future in increasingly specific terms. The mating ceremony we'd have, the position I'd take in pack leadership, the changes I'd need to make to be worthy of standing beside him. All lies, all designed to make me invest everything into a future he had no intention of delivering. 3 days before the summer solstice celebration, Todd's lawyer delivered a new set of documents. What are these? I asked, scanning the dense legal language. Business investment opportunities, Todd explained. Several council members are launching a joint venture, expanding territory, developing resources, that sort of thing. And I'm contributing capital, and I thought you might want to participate as well. I read more carefully. The investment required significant financial contribution with all assets and returns controlled by Todd as primary stakeholder. It was the same trap that had caught Suzanne's father, Isabel's family, and countless others. The only problem was I didn't have any family business to sign away. I'd come to Pine Haven as a nobody with nothing. Todd, I said carefully, I don't have the kind of money this requires. His smile was understanding. I know, sweetheart, but you have something better. You're my mate. Your signature on these documents shows unity, shows the council that we're committed to each other and to the pack's future. It's symbolic more than financial. Symbolic until he rejected me and used my signature to claim I'd invested willingly in ventures that would benefit him long after I was gone. Another layer of the trap. Now, if you're seeing how deep Todd's manipulation runs and want to watch Brandy's revenge unfold, subscribe if you haven't, because the next chapter is where everything explodes. I trust you completely, I said, signing my name with a trembling hand that was half acting and half genuine anger at how many she-wolves had fallen for this exact scheme. I know you do. He kissed my forehead like I was a child who'd performed a trick correctly. That's what makes you perfect. 2 days later, at the night before the summer solstice celebration, Todd called me into his office. I have something important to discuss, he said, and I recognized the tone. This was it, the setup for tomorrow's public rejection. What is it? I asked, playing the loving mate perfectly. You know I care about you, Brandy. He took my hands, his expression grave. These past months have been wonderful. You've been everything I could have asked for in a mate. Past tense. He was already distancing himself. But, I prompted softly, but I've been thinking about the future. about what the pack needs, about my responsibilities as alpha. He sighed like this was causing him pain, and I'm not sure we're as compatible as I'd hoped. There it was, the beginning of the rejection script he'd used 6 times before. What do you mean? I let my voice shake. You're wonderful, Brandy. Sweet, trusting, eager to please. But an alpha needs a mate who can match him in strength, in political acumen. He trailed off delicately. In presence. You're simply too gentle, too inexperienced for what I need. The critique was designed to make me internalize fault, to make me believe the rejection was my failing, not his cruelty. I can change, I whispered, playing the desperate role perfectly. I can be stronger, more. No, he cut me off gently. I wouldn't want you to change who you are. That wouldn't be fair to either of us. He squeezed my hands. Tomorrow at the celebration, I'm going to make an announcement about our relationship status. I wanted you to hear it from me first, privately. I thought it would be kinder. Kinder than rejecting me without warning, he meant. As if this advance notice somehow made the public humiliation less cruel. You're ending things? I let tears fill my eyes. Tomorrow? In front of everyone? It's better to be honest, to give everyone clarity about where things stand. His tone was patient, like he was explaining something to a child. I'll make it clear that you're a lovely person who simply wasn't the right match. No one will blame you. They'd absolutely blame me. That was the entire point. Public rejection that made me look inadequate, while he looked like a decisive leader making tough choices. Please, I whispered. Please don't do this. I'm sorry, Brandy. My decision is final. He released my hands. You can stay in the estate tonight. But I think it's best if you move back to your cottage after the announcement. Clean break, you understand. I nodded, tears streaming down my face now. Real tears. Because even though I knew this was coming, even though the bond was simulated and my heart belonged to Raziel, the sheer cruelty of how Todd operated made me weep for every she-wolf who'd stood where I was standing and believed they deserved this treatment. I'll pack tonight, I managed. That's probably wise. He turned back to his desk, already dismissing me. The conversation was over. I'd served my purpose, and now I was being discarded. Oh, and Brandy? The documents you signed regarding the business investments? Those are binding regardless of our personal relationship status, just so you're aware. There was the final twist of the knife. Even with nothing to take from me financially, he wanted to make sure I understood I'd signed something that could theoretically be used against me. One last demonstration of his power. I fled to my room, maintaining the heartbroken act until I was alone. Then I contacted Raziel through our bond. It's happening. Tomorrow at the summer solstice celebration, he's rejecting me publicly. I'll be there, Raziel sent back grimly. The moon goddess is prepared. The moment he speaks those words, we move. Good. And I wiped away the tears and pulled out my evidence files. Because I've got enough documentation to bury him and his entire network. Are you ready for this? I thought about Jamie and Isabel, dead because they'd trusted the wrong wolf. About Paige, who'd tried to die because the shame was too heavy to carry. About Suzanne and Melinda and Blanca, walking through life as shadows of who they'd been. And about every she-wolf across 5 territories who'd been taught that their value was determined by an alpha's approval. I'm ready, I sent back. Let's show them what happens when you mistake divine justice for a naive she-wolf. Tomorrow, Alpha Todd Ford would stand in front of his pack and deliver the rejection he'd been building toward for months, and I would finally get to watch his world burn. Chapter 5. The Rejection. The summer solstice celebration transformed the Pack Commons into something out of a fairy tale. Thousands of fairy lights draped through ancient trees, long tables groaned under elaborate feast preparations, and wolves in formal attire circulated with champagne and carefully practiced smiles. I stood near the edge of the gathering, wearing the elegant green dress Todd had suggested I purchase for the occasion. My last performance as the devoted mate, as the final act before the curtain fell. Around me, pack members whispered, They knew something was coming. Todd had been unusually attentive all evening, keeping me close while simultaneously maintaining a subtle distance, the body language of a wolf preparing to make an announcement. Across the commons, I spotted Raziel in his divine commander robes, positioned near the raised platform where Todd would make his speech. Our eyes met briefly, and I felt his steady presence through our real bond. Supportive, ready, waiting for the signal to unleash divine judgment. "You look beautiful tonight," Todd murmured, appearing at my elbow with champagne. "Absolutely radiant." "Thank you," I said softly, accepting the glass with trembling hands, playing the nervous mate who sensed something was wrong but couldn't quite name it. "I meant what I said last night," he continued, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You're a lovely person, Brandy. This isn't about you being inadequate. It's about me needing something different." The pre-rejection reassurance, making sure I'd internalize the failure as mine, while he positioned himself as the regretful but decisive leader. "I understand," I whispered, though my eyes betrayed confusion and hurt. "Good." He squeezed my shoulder once, then moved toward the platform where the council members were gathering. "I should make my announcement. The pack has been waiting." I watched him climb the steps, and watched how he commanded attention without even trying, watched the pack members settle into expectant silence. He was good at this, dangerously good. "My friends," Todd began, his voice carrying easily across the commons, "thank you all for joining us on this beautiful solstice evening. As your alpha, it's my privilege to celebrate with you, to share in the joy and prosperity our pack has achieved." Applause rippled through the crowd. Todd smiled, basking in the approval. "As many of you know, I've spent the past several months courting Brandy Connor." He gestured toward me, and hundreds of eyes swiveled in my direction. The mate bond between us seemed strong, and I hoped we might build a future together. Seemed. Past tense. The crowd's energy shifted as wolves realized where this was heading. "However," Todd continued, his expression grave, "I've come to realize that wanting something to work and having it actually be right are two different things. Brandy is a wonderful she-wolf, kind, trusting, eager to please. But as I've evaluated what our pack needs, what I need in a partner who can stand beside me in leadership..." He paused, letting the implication hang. "She's not good enough. I've made the difficult decision that we are not, in fact, compatible as life mates." The gasps were audible. Several pack members looked at me with pity, others with knowing expressions. They'd seen this play out before. I let shock and hurt flood my face, as let my knees buckle slightly, as if his words had physically struck me. Ida materialized at my side, supporting my elbow with an expression of helpless sympathy. "This isn't a reflection on Brandy's worth as a person," Todd went on, his voice full of carefully calibrated regret. "Sometimes the moon goddess shows us connections that teach us about ourselves, rather than connections meant to last forever. I'm grateful for our time together, and I wish her nothing but happiness in her future." The dismissal was complete. Public, humiliating, and designed to make me look like a temporary lesson, rather than a valued partner. "Therefore," Todd announced, "I formally dissolve any courtship bond between myself and Brandy Connor, effective immediately." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around me, wolves whispered. Some looked sympathetic, others looked relieved they weren't in my position. Yes, a few, she-wolves who'd been through this themselves, looked gutted, reliving their own rejections through mine. This was the moment. The culmination of months of investigation, the point where Todd thought he'd won completely. Time to show him how wrong he was. I stepped forward, away from Ida's supporting hand, and let the devastated expression fall from my face like a discarded mask. "Thank you," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent commons. Todd blinked, and confusion flickering across his features. "I'm sorry?" I said thank you, Alpha Todd. I smiled, and it wasn't the sweet, submissive smile he'd grown accustomed to. It was sharp, dangerous. "Thank you for rejecting me. I was wondering how to tell you I already found someone better." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in the grass. Todd's face cycled through shock, confusion, and then anger. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you just made this so much easier for me. I walked toward the platform, and the crowd parted automatically. See, I've been trying to figure out the best way to tell you that our entire relationship was a lie, that I was never actually interested in you, that I've been using you this whole time. His expression darkened. You're upset. I understand, but making wild claims... Oh, I'm not upset at all. I climbed the steps to stand on the platform beside him, turning to address the assembled pack. I'm actually relieved. You see, I came to Pine Haven 6 months ago with a very specific mission. And you, Alpha Todd Ford, just completed it perfectly. Brandy, what are you... My name, I interrupted, my voice ringing with authority I'd carefully hidden for months, is Divine Enforcer Brandy Connor. I've served the Moon Goddess for 3 centuries, and I was sent here to investigate claims that you've been systematically abusing the sacred mate bond for personal gain. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Todd went very still, his mind clearly racing to reassess everything he thought he knew. That's ridiculous, he said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. You're just a spurned she-wolf making accusations. Am I? I pulled the divine crystal from my necklace, and it blazed with celestial light. Because I have 6 months of documented evidence, recorded conversations, photographs of your private journals where you detail exactly how to break she-wolves for profit, testimony from your previous victims, and contracts designed to exploit vulnerable females that you had me sign, thinking I was too stupid to understand them. The color drained from Todd's face. The mate bond you felt? I continued. Simulated. Created by the Moon Goddess herself to test whether you'd treat someone you perceived as weak and powerless with basic dignity. You failed. Spectacularly. I turned to the crowd, making sure everyone could hear. Everything Alpha Todd told you about our relationship was calculated manipulation. He never cared about me. He was following a pattern he's perfected over years. Identify vulnerable she-wolves, make them fall in love, extract whatever value they possess, then publicly destroy them to maintain power and control. She's lying. Todd's composure was cracking. This is some kind of revenge fantasy. Is it? I held up the crystal, and holographic images burst into the air above the platform. Todd's journals, his conversations with other corrupt alphas, the contracts he'd used to trap Isabel's family, Suzanne's father, countless others. Because I have proof of everything, including your role in the deaths of Jamie and Isabel. The crowd's murmurs turned to angry growls. Several pack members pushed forward, recognizing names of daughters, sisters, friends who'd been destroyed by their alpha's calculated cruelty. You can't prove I had anything to do with their deaths, Todd said, but he was backing away now, realizing how completely his world was unraveling. Actually, I can. I pulled up a specific journal entry, and his own handwriting floating in the air for everyone to see. Jamie, total success. Cliff death ruled accidental. Perfect template for future terminations. The words hung there, damning and undeniable. You called her death a success, I said quietly. You turned a she-wolf's suicide into a case study for how to better destroy the next victim. The growls from the crowd grew louder. Several wolves shifted partially, their rage at their alpha's betrayal manifesting in physical transformation. Divine Commander, I called, and Raziel stepped onto the platform. The crowd fell silent again, recognizing the power radiating from him. Present, he said formally, then turned to Todd with an expression of absolute contempt. Alpha Todd Ford, you stand accused of mate bond exploitation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and complicity in the deaths of 2 pack members. How do you plead? This is insane. Todd looked around wildly, searching for support. Council members. Surely you see this as a setup. The council sees what we've always chosen not to see, said Guy Shepherd, one of the senior members, his voice heavy with shame. Because it was easier to benefit from your political acumen than acknowledge the she-wolves you destroyed to maintain it. I gave this pack prosperity, Todd shouted. I expanded our territory, increased our resources, made us powerful. By using sacred mate bonds as business tools, I interrupted. By treating she-wolves as disposable resources, by convincing yourself that results justified any method, no matter how cruel. And who are you to judge me? He snarled, his mask of civility completely shattered now. You deceived me. You lied about who you were. You're no better than— I'm exactly better than you, I said coldly. Because I lied to expose corruption and protect future victims. You lied to exploit vulnerable she-wolves and increase your personal power. That we are not the same. Raziel moved closer to Todd, divine energy crackling around him. The moon goddess offers you one chance at honesty, Alpha Ford. Confess your crimes fully, name any co-conspirators, and face judgment with whatever dignity you have left, or refuse, and we'll extract the truth through divine interrogation. Todd looked between us, between the evidence floating in the air, between the angry pack members who'd trusted him and were now seeing him for what he truly was. "Shah, I want a lawyer," he said finally. "You're not under mortal law," Raziel replied. "You're under divine judgment. There are no lawyers here, only truth and consequences." For a long moment, Todd seemed to consider fighting. Then something in him broke, and he laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. "Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I used the mate bond system. Yes, I manipulated she-wolves for gain. Yes, I perfected techniques for breaking them down and extracting maximum value." He glared at me. "And I'd do it again, because that's what alphas do. We take what we need. We use the resources available to us. That's not corruption. That's survival." "That's sociopathy," I corrected. "And you just confessed to everything in front of 500 witnesses." The divine crystal pulsed, recording his words. Evidence captured. Confession complete. "Divine Enforcer Brandy Connor," came a voice that made everyone in the Commons drop to their knees. As the moon goddess herself appeared above the platform, radiant and terrible in her celestial glory. "You have completed your investigation. What is your recommendation?" I bowed deeply. "Your Grace, I recommend immediate stripping of alpha status, seizure of all assets gained through mate bond exploitation, mandatory restitution to all victims, and sentencing under divine law for his role in 2 she-wolf deaths." Recommendation noted. The goddess turned her attention to Todd, who was trying to maintain defiance while clearly terrified. "Alpha Todd Ford, you have weaponized my most sacred gift. You have turned bonds meant to bring joy into tools of destruction. You have broken she-wolves who trusted you and called their suffering success." "I was just—" he started. "Silence." Her voice cracked like thunder. "You will not speak again until I grant permission." Todd's mouth snapped shut, divine power binding him. "You asked for judgment?" the goddess continued. Very well. Here is my sentence. You will experience what you have inflicted. For the next 7 years, you will feel mate bonds with 7 different she-wolves. Each bond will be genuine, overwhelming, all-consuming, and each will reject you using the exact words and methods you used on your victims. Todd's eyes widened in horror as he understood the implications. You will feel Isabel's desperation as you try to convince them you're worthy. Yet you will experience Jamie's despair when they publicly humiliate you. You will know Paige's devastation when they discard you like garbage. And unlike them, you will not have the mercy of forgetting or the escape of death. You will remember every moment, feel every pain, and understand precisely what you have done to others. The goddess's eyes blazed brighter. "Your first bond activates now!" Todd gasped, his hand flying to his chest as divine magic struck. As his eyes locked onto a she-wolf in the crowd, Melinda, one of his previous victims, and I watched his expression transform into desperate, genuine longing. Melinda looked at him with utter contempt. "You?" she said, her voice dripping with disgust. "My mate? The moon goddess must be joking. You're beneath me. You're nothing." His own words, his own tactics, thrown back at him with surgical precision. Todd collapsed to his knees, the pain of rejection written across his face. Real pain this time. And not the calculated performance he'd used on countless others, but genuine heartbreak. 7 years, the goddess said softly. 7 bonds, 7 rejections. Perhaps by the end you'll understand why mate bonds are sacred, or perhaps you'll simply learn what it means to suffer. She turned to me. Well done, Enforcer Connor. Your investigation has exposed not just one corrupt alpha, but a network of abuse spanning 5 territories. And the other alphas you identified will face similar judgment. Thank you, Your Grace. The goddess smiled. Now go to your real mate. You've earned rest. She vanished in a flash of silver light, leaving Todd on his knees, experiencing his first rejection while the pack he'd ruled looked on with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. Raziel pulled me into his arms, and I felt the real mate bond, warm, solid, alive, wash away the lingering hollowness of the simulated one. It's over, he murmured against my hair. Not yet. I pulled back to address the crowd. For everyone here who's been hurt by Alpha Ford's manipulation, for the families of Jamie and Isabel, for Suzanne and Paige and Blanca, and every she-wolf who was taught that rejection meant they were worthless, this is your proof that you were never the problem. He was. The system that protected him was. And that system is being dismantled as we speak. Around the commons, several she-wolves were crying. Not from sadness, but from relief, from validation, from finally understanding that their pain had been real and unjust, not deserved. Ida pushed through the crowd to reach me. You were investigating him the whole time? Every moment, I smiled at her. You tried to warn me about his pattern. Thank you for that. Your testimony will help make sure he faces full accountability. I just wish I'd fought back myself, she said quietly. You did. I squeezed her hand. You warned new she-wolves. Oh, you remembered the ones he destroyed. You kept their stories alive when everyone else wanted to forget. That matters. The council members approached, led by Guy Shepherd. Enforcer Connor, we owe you an apology. We allowed this to continue because it was politically convenient. Because Alpha Ford brought prosperity that we valued more than the she-wolves he destroyed. Yes, you did, I said bluntly, and you'll answer for that complicity. The Moon Goddess's investigation doesn't end with Todd. Every wolf who enabled him, who looked the other way, who benefited from his crimes, you'll all face accountability. Guy nodded, accepting the judgment. We deserve nothing less. Across the commons, pack members were approaching the platform where Todd still knelt, overwhelmed by his first rejection. Some spat at his feet. Others simply stared, witnessing the fall of a wolf they'd feared and followed. Suzanne's father was there, tears streaming down his weathered face. My daughter, he said to Todd. You broke my daughter. Todd couldn't respond. The goddess's binding still held, but his eyes showed something that might have been shame. I hope these 7 years teach you what it means to hurt, the father continued. I hope you feel a fraction of what she felt, what they all felt. He turned and walked away, and I watched other family members approach with similar sentiments, justice being served one painful moment at a time. Come on, Raziel said quietly. Let them have this moment. You've done your job. He was right. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about a pack beginning to heal, about she-wolves reclaiming their narratives, about a system of abuse finally facing consequences. We walked away from the celebration turned judgment, and with each step, I felt the weight of 6 months of deception lifting. I'd been Brandy, the naive nobody, for so long that being myself again felt strange. How does it feel? Raziel asked. To finally drop the act? Liberating. I leaned into him. And exhausting. I never want to pretend to be submissive again. He laughed. Good. Because watching you play weak and helpless was torture. I much prefer you, terrifying and competent. You say the sweetest things. We reached the edge of pack territory, where divine light would transport us back to the celestial realm, but I paused, as looking back at these commons, where the summer solstice celebration had turned into something else entirely. A reckoning. A revolution. A reminder that abuse hidden in plain sight could be exposed by wolves brave enough to look. Do you think it'll change things? I asked. Long term? Raziel considered. Maybe, Todd wasn't the disease. He was a symptom. But symptoms can be treated. And I think watching him face consequences will make other alphas think twice before following his example. And the she-wolves? I thought of Suzanne, of Paige, of all the others still carrying scars. Will they heal? Some will, some won't, but they'll all know their pain was real and unjust. That matters more than you might think. He was right. Validation didn't erase trauma, but it was a necessary first step toward healing. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "More than ready." I smiled. "And we have a century-long vacation to start." "Actually," Raziel said with a slight wince, "the goddess has already assigned us a new investigation. Apparently, there's a corrupt pack in the Eastern Territories that—" I held up a hand. "Raziel, my love, light of my eternal life, if you finish that sentence, I will make you experience what Todd's going through." He laughed and pulled me close. "Fine. 1 century. No investigations. Just us." Perfect. We stepped into the divine light together, Edva leaving Pine Haven to its healing and Todd to his punishment. Behind us, I heard the pack beginning to sing, an old moon hymn about justice and renewal. My work here was done. But somewhere in the Eastern Territories, another corrupt alpha was probably exploiting she-wolves and thinking he'd never face consequences. He was wrong. They were all wrong. Because the moon goddess had wolves like me to make sure that sacred bonds stayed sacred. And we were very, very good at our jobs. Chapter 6. The Network Exposed. 3 days after Todd's public sentencing, I stood in the Hall of Eternal Judgment, reviewing evidence files that made my 6-month investigation look simple by comparison. The Divine Crystal had been analyzing data continuously since the confrontation, cross-referencing Todd's documented connections with complaint records across 5 territories. What emerged was worse than we'd suspected. 47 alphas, I said aloud, and staring at the holographic web of connections floating in front of me. 47 confirmed participants in the mate bond exploitation network. Raziel moved beside me, his expression growing darker as he studied the evidence. And those are just the ones Todd directly communicated with. If we include suspected participants based on pattern recognition, the number doubles, I finished grimly. Nearly 100 alphas across the werewolf territories have been using similar tactics. Some learned from Todd. Others developed their own methods independently, but they're all connected through informal networks where they share strategies. The moon goddess materialized behind us, her presence causing the evidence files to glow brighter. "Show me the worst cases." I pulled up specific files, highlighting 3 alphas whose patterns were particularly egregious. Alpha Harold Friedman in the Eastern Territories, I began. 23 documented rejections over 15 years. 4 confirmed deaths, including 2 she-wolves who were pregnant when he discarded them. He specializes in targeting healers and empaths, wolves whose natural compassion makes them easy to manipulate. The goddess's expression hardened. "Continue." Alpha Adrian Martin in the Southern Reaches. 16 rejections, but his pattern is different. He doesn't just exploit individual she-wolves, he uses mate bond manipulation to take over entire family businesses. 3-pack families have been bankrupted after their daughters were courted and rejected. He's essentially conducting corporate raids through romantic relationships. And the third? Her voice was cold enough to frost the air. Alpha Brian Orozco in the Western Mountains. I pulled up his file, and even Raziel flinched at what it contained. 9 rejections, but the psychological damage is extreme. He practices what his journals call extended degradation, deliberately keeping she-wolves in relationships for years while systematically destroying their self-worth. 2 of his victims are institutionalized. 3 others have completely withdrawn from pack society. He treats breaking she-wolves as a hobby. The silence that followed was heavy with divine fury. "These wolves have operated with impunity for decades," the goddess said quietly. "Why? And how did they escape notice for so long?" "Because they're protected," Raziel answered, pulling up another set of files. "Look at the council connections. Harold sits on the Regional Alpha Council. Adrian's family has hereditary seats on 3 separate governance boards. Brian's pack controls strategic mountain passes that multiple territories depend on for trade." They're too politically valuable to challenge, I added. Even when complaints were filed, they were dismissed as personal relationship issues outside council jurisdiction. The system protected them because dismantling their operations would disrupt the political and economic structures built around their power. The goddess studied the evidence for a long moment. Then we dismantle those structures. I blinked. Your Grace? If the current system protects abusers because they're politically valuable, then the system itself is corrupt and must be reformed. Her eyes blazed with determination. We don't just punish these 47 alphas. We rebuild werewolf governance from the foundation up. Raziel and I exchanged glances. This was bigger than any investigation we'd conducted. This was civilization-level reform. That will require cooperation from territory leaders who benefit from the current system, Raziel said carefully. Many will resist. Then they'll face the same judgment as the alphas they protected. The goddess's tone brooked no argument. Enforcer Connor, I'm expanding your mission. You'll lead a team of investigators to simultaneously expose all 47 confirmed participants. Divine Commander Raziel will coordinate with territory leaders to implement new governance structures that prevent future abuse. A coordinated operation across 5 territories, I said slowly, mind already racing through logistics. We'd need at least 20 enforcers, full divine authority to override local pack law, and protection for witnesses who come forward. You'll have 50 enforcers, unlimited authority, and my personal guarantee of witness protection. The goddess waved her hand, and new figures materialized in the hall. Divine enforcers from across the celestial realm, all summoned for this unprecedented operation. I'm also assigning Enforcer Holly McGrath as your second in command. I turned to see Holly, my former bakery co-worker, now standing in full Enforcer armor. Her nervous demeanor was gone, replaced by grim determination. You're a divine enforcer? I asked, shocked. For 2 centuries, Holly confirmed. I was assigned to Pinehaven 5 years ago to monitor Todd, but my cover was as a low-ranking pack member. I documented what I could, but didn't have authorization to move against him until your investigation provided sufficient evidence for divine intervention. You were watching him for 5 years? I felt a flash of anger. You knew what he was doing to those she-wolves, and I reported every incident to the celestial authorities, Holly interrupted, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. Who told me repeatedly that we needed more evidence, better documentation, a proof of systemic abuse rather than individual crimes? Do you know what it's like to watch wolves suffer while you wait for bureaucratic approval to help them? The pain in her voice was genuine, and I realized she'd been just as trapped by the system as Todd's victims, forced to witness abuse she wasn't authorized to stop. I'm sorry, I said quietly. That must have been torture. It was, but it ends now. Holly's expression hardened. I want Harold Friedman. I've been tracking his pattern for decades, and I have enough rage stored up to make his judgment memorable. The goddess nodded. Assigned. Enforcer Connor, you'll take the coordination role from here. Divide the 47 targets among your team, establish operational parameters, and execute simultaneous interventions within 7 days. 7 days? That was an incredibly tight timeline for an operation of this scope. Speed is essential. If we move against one alpha, and the others will be warned and start destroying evidence. We need synchronized strikes across all territories simultaneously. The goddess's eyes swept across the assembled enforcers. This is the largest divine intervention in werewolf affairs in 3 centuries. The repercussions will reshape supernatural society. Are you all prepared for that responsibility? The enforcers responded in unison. Yes, Your Grace. Then begin. She turned to me specifically. Brandy. You've proven yourself capable of not just investigation, but of understanding the systemic issues that enable individual crimes. I'm trusting you to lead this reformation. Don't let the she-wolves who've suffered down. The weight of that responsibility settled onto my shoulders, but I stood straighter under it. I won't, Your Grace. The next 7 days were controlled chaos, and I divided the 47 targets into priority tiers based on severity of crimes and likelihood of evidence destruction. Harold, Adrian, and Brian were Tier 1. Immediate intervention required. The remaining 44 were distributed among teams of enforcers with specific skill sets matching each investigation's needs. Holly took her team to the Eastern Territories to begin surveillance on Harold. Her reports came back within hours. Target currently courting his 24th victim, and she sent through divine communication. She's a healer named Jenny, 26 years old, orphaned last year. Perfect vulnerability profile. He's already started the isolation tactics. Can you protect her without revealing our operation? I asked. Already assigned a guardian spirit. If he tries anything physical before we move, she'll be extracted. But Brandy, watching him work, seeing the pattern play out in real time, it's taking everything I have not to intervene early. 6 more days. I sent back. Then we end all of them at once. Similar reports came from other teams. Adrian was in the middle of a courtship with a she-wolf whose family owned valuable mining rights. Brian had 3 current victims in various stages of psychological destruction, and dozens of other alphas across the territories were actively exploiting she-wolves who had no idea they were part of a documented pattern. Raziel spent those 7 days in diplomatic negotiations that would make even celestial beings exhausted. He met with territory leaders, explaining that the moon goddess was implementing mandatory governance reforms. Those who cooperated would maintain their positions. Those who resisted would find themselves facing the same divine judgment as the alphas they'd protected. Most cooperated. A few didn't. The Western Mountain Council is refusing to acknowledge divine authority over pack governance. Raziel reported on day 5. They're claiming Brian's pack sovereignty supersedes celestial jurisdiction. How many council members have family connections to Brian? I asked. All of them. His network of exploitation isn't just romantic. He's been using similar tactics on male wolves, too. Promises of business partnerships, political alliances, resource access. Then he extracts what he needs and leaves them trapped in unfavorable agreements. So the entire Western Mountain Council is complicit. Not completely. They've built their power structure on Brian's exploitation tactics. Dismantling him means dismantling all of them. I pulled up the Western Mountain files, studying the web of connections. Brian had spent 20 years creating a system where pack leaders were personally invested in his continued success. Removing him would destabilize the entire region. Good. Tell them they have 48 hours to resign voluntarily, I sent to Raziel. After that, or we remove them by force and install interim leadership under direct divine supervision. That's going to cause political upheaval. That's going to cause necessary reform, I corrected. These wolves built power on the suffering of she-wolves they considered disposable. If their entire system collapses when one corrupt alpha falls, then the system deserved to collapse. The moon goddess's voice echoed through our communication link. Well said, Enforcer Connor. Proceed as recommended. And on the 6th day, I received an unexpected visitor in my temporary office at the Hall of Eternal Judgment. Suzanne stood in the doorway, looking stronger than she had in months. The hollow expression was gone, replaced by determined focus. I want to help, she said without preamble. Help with what? The investigation, the operation, whatever you're planning. She moved into the room, pulling out a folder thick with documents. I've been talking to other she-wolves who were hurt by Todd. We've been comparing notes, documenting our experiences, building testimonies, and we realized something. I gestured for her to continue. Todd wasn't just connected to other alphas. He was teaching them. We found correspondence where he was explicitly coaching younger alphas on mate bond strategy. He was spreading his tactics, turning individual corruption into institutional practice. My blood ran cold. Show me. She opened the folder, revealing printed emails, copied journal entries, and transcribed conversations. Todd had been running what amounted to a corruption academy, teaching other alphas his techniques in exchange for political favors and business advantages. This is incredible work, I said, scanning the documents. How did you get these? Some of us still have access to pack records from our time with Todd. Others have contacts in adjacent territories, and a few, she smiled grimly, a few of us learned to be sneaky from watching him manipulate us. We turned his own tactics back on his network. I looked at her with new respect. You've been conducting your own investigation. We've been getting ready to fight back, she corrected. We just didn't know how until you showed us it was possible. So we're offering our evidence and our testimony. Use it however helps take these wolves down. I accepted the folder, already seeing how this information could strengthen multiple cases. This could be dangerous. Going public with this kind of evidence is exactly what we need to do, Suzanne interrupted. We spent too long being silent, being ashamed, letting them make us feel like we were the problem. Now we're done being quiet. Behind her, more she-wolves appeared in the doorway. I recognized some from Pine Haven, Melinda, Blanca, even Paige, looking fragile but determined. Others were strangers, presumably victims from other territories. We're all done being quiet, Melinda said. Whatever you're planning, we want to be part of it. I looked at this group of she-wolves who'd been broken by systematic abuse and had somehow found the strength to fight back. This was why the operation mattered. Not just punishing corrupt alphas, but empowering their victims to reclaim their voices. All right, I said. Here's what we're doing. I explained the 7-day timeline, the 47 simultaneous interventions, the systematic dismantling of the exploitation network. As I talked, and I watched their expressions shift from determination to something fiercer. Hope mixed with righteous anger, a dangerous combination for wolves who'd been taught they were powerless. Tomorrow night, we move, I finished. Every corrupt alpha across 5 territories faces divine judgment simultaneously. And I want you there, not as victims, but as witnesses. Not as broken she-wolves, but as survivors demanding accountability. Will they go to prison? Paige asked quietly. Oh, will they suffer? They'll face the same punishment Todd is experiencing, I explained. 7 years of genuine mate bonds with 7 different she-wolves who will reject them using their own tactics. They'll feel everything they inflicted, understand every moment of pain they caused. That's not enough, Blanca said flatly. 7 years for destroying dozens of lives? It's not meant to be equivalent punishment, I replied. It's meant to be transformative. By the end, they'll either become wolves capable of genuine empathy and remorse, or they'll be permanently branded as irredeemable and exiled from werewolf society entirely. And if they don't change? Suzanne asked. Then they spend eternity in the mirror realm, experiencing their own cruelty reflected back at them forever. I met each of their eyes. The moon goddess's justice isn't about simple retribution. It's about giving every wolf a chance at redemption, while ensuring they can never hurt anyone else. The she-wolves considered this, then slowly nodded. It wasn't the vengeful punishment some of them wanted, but it was justice. Real, meaningful, inescapable justice. We'll be there, Suzanne said. All of us. After they left, I found Raziel reviewing final operational details for tomorrow's synchronized interventions. The victim testimony network is expanding, I told him. Suzanne and others have been independently investigating Todd's connections. They have evidence I didn't even know existed. That's good, Raziel said. The stronger our documentation, the harder it will be for anyone to claim this is divine overreach. You're worried about pushback. I'm worried about 50 enforcers moving against 47 alphas simultaneously while trying to reform governance structures that have existed for centuries. He rubbed his temples. This operation could either reshape werewolf society for the better or trigger a civil war. I moved behind him, massaging the tension from his shoulders. We're doing the right thing. I know. Doesn't make it less terrifying. You know what I keep thinking about? I said quietly. Jamie. The she-wolf who walked off that cliff because Todd's rejection made her feel worthless. If we'd done this investigation 5 years earlier, she'd still be alive. You can't think like that, Raziel said gently. You can't carry the weight of every wolf you couldn't save in time. I know, but I can make sure that 5 years from now, there isn't another Jamie, another Isabel, another she-wolf who believes rejection means she deserves to die. I kissed the top of his head. That's worth the risk of civil war. When did you become so wise? He asked with a slight smile. About 3 centuries ago, when I met a divine commander who taught me that justice and compassion aren't opposites. They're partners. I don't remember teaching you that. You didn't have to. You showed me." We stood there in comfortable silence, reviewing the final details of an operation that would either save countless lives or destabilize supernatural society. Tomorrow night we'd find out which. And day 7 arrived with clear skies and perfect full moon, the moon goddess's way of making sure every werewolf across 5 territories would witness what was coming. 50 divine enforcers stood assembled in the Hall of Eternal Judgment, each one assigned to a specific target, each one carrying evidence files and divine authority to override local pack law. The moon goddess addressed us one final time. "Tonight, you don't just punish individual wolves," she said. "You demonstrate that abuse hidden in plain sight will be exposed. That power doesn't protect you from consequences. That the sacred bonds I create are not weapons to be used against the vulnerable." She paused, her gaze sweeping across all of us. "Some territories will resist. Some alphas will fight. Some pack members will defend wolves who've brought them prosperity despite the cost to others. Your job is not to convince them you're right. Your job is to enforce divine law regardless of mortal opinion." "Yes, Your Grace," we responded in unison. "Then go. Bring justice to those who've waited too long for it, and bring accountability to those who thought they were untouchable." Divine light flared, and 50 enforcers dispersed across 5 territories simultaneously. The largest divine intervention in 3 centuries had begun, and tomorrow, werewolf society would never be the same. Chapter 7. Simultaneous Justice. The Eastern Territories materialized around me in a flash of silver light. I'd chosen to personally handle Harold Friedman's intervention, the alpha who'd specialized in targeting healers and empaths, leaving 4 dead she-wolves in his wake. Holly stood waiting at the edge of his territory, her enforcer armor gleaming in the moonlight. Behind her, 20 she-wolves gathered, each one a survivor of Harold's calculated cruelty. "Status?" I asked. He's at the Harvest Moon celebration with his current target, Jenny. She's already showing signs of the pattern. Nervous, overly eager to please, laughing too hard at his jokes. Holly's expression was granite. He introduced her to his council members tonight. Public acknowledgement phase, exactly like Todd's pattern. "How many witnesses?" 300 pack members, plus the Regional Alpha Council. Harold made sure this was a major event. She smiled coldly. Which means 300 witnesses when we expose him." I pulled out my divine crystal, reviewing the final evidence compilation. 23 documented rejections, 4 confirmed deaths, hundreds of recorded conversations where Harold discussed his victims like they were business transactions. Testimony from 15 survivors who'd found the courage to speak. It was damning, comprehensive, and absolutely irrefutable. "Let's go," I said. We walked into the celebration together, our divine authority radiating from us in visible waves. Pack members fell silent as we passed, their wolves instinctively recognizing celestial power. Harold stood on a raised platform, Jenny tucked under his arm, addressing the crowd with practiced charm. He was mid-sentence about finding unexpected love in surprising places when he noticed us. His smile froze. "Alpha Harold Friedman," I called out, my voice magically amplified to carry across the gathering. "I am Divine Enforcer Brandy Connor, and I'm here to serve judgment for crimes against the sacred mate bond." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Jenny looked between Harold and me with confused fear. Harold's expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and then forced confidence. "I don't know what you think you're investigating, Enforcer," he said smoothly, "but I assure you there's been some mistake. I've committed no crimes." "Haven't you?" I pulled out the crystal. And holographic evidence burst into the air above the celebration. "Because I have documentation of 23 mate bond exploitations over 15 years. 23 she-wolves courted, manipulated, and publicly rejected after you extracted what you needed from them. The images showed correspondence, journal entries, recorded conversations, all of it featuring Harold's distinctive handwriting and voice. "Those are private documents," Harold protested. You have no right?" "I have divine authority that supersedes your pack law," I interrupted. "And these documents detail systematic abuse of she-wolves, including the deliberate targeting of healers and empaths because their compassionate nature makes them, quote, easier to break," Jenny gasped, pulling away from Harold. Around the gathering, pack members were staring at their alpha with growing horror. "You're taking things out of context," Harold said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Gee, relationships end. That's not a crime." "No, but causing 4 she-wolf deaths through calculated psychological destruction is." I pulled up specific files. Joni Hopkins, healer, age 28, rejected after you secured her family's support for your counsel position. Suicide by drowning 3 weeks later. Gertrude Rose, empath, age 31, rejected after you gained access to her network of influential pack connections. An overdose on heart medication 2 months after rejection. I continued listing names, ages, how they died. With each one, Harold's face grew paler and the crowd's anger grew louder. Marion Harrison, healer, age 24. Maggie McCabe, empath, age 27. Both dead within 6 months of your rejections. Both ruled as tragic accidents or medical complications. And both leaving behind notes that their families destroyed before they could be used as evidence against you. "I didn't kill anyone," Harold shouted. "If those she-wolves couldn't handle rejection, that's not my fault." "You calculated their vulnerabilities," Holly interrupted, stepping forward with barely controlled fury. "You specifically chose healers and empaths because you knew their ability to feel others' pain would make your rejection devastate them more completely. You weaponized their compassion against them." She pulled up additional evidence, psychological profiles Harold had kept on each target, noting their weakness vectors and exploitation opportunities. "You studied them like prey," Holly continued. "You documented which tactics would cause maximum emotional damage. You planned their destruction, then acted surprised when they couldn't survive it." The pack members were growling now, some partially shifting in their rage. And the regional Alpha Council members who'd supported Harold for years were backing away, recognizing how completely they'd been complicit in enabling a predator. "Jenny," I said gently, addressing the terrified she-wolf who'd been Harold's intended victim number 24, "how long have you known Alpha Harold?" 3 months, she whispered. "And has he asked you to do anything unusual? Sign any documents? Introduce him to important contacts? Provide access to resources?" Her face crumpled as understanding dawned. He asked me to use my healing abilities to treat several council members for free, said it would be good for my reputation, and he wanted me to convince my mentor to support his re-election to the regional council. "You're a healer," I said, "like Joni and Gertrude and Marion. He chose you because of your abilities and your compassionate nature. And in another few months, after he'd extracted what he needed, he would have rejected you publicly and left you to deal with the psychological aftermath alone." Jenny looked at Harold with dawning horror. "You were going to... But you said, we're supposed to be..." "The mate bond between you is genuine," I told her, "but his intentions never were. He's been following a pattern he's perfected over 15 years. You would have been number 24. Harold tried to grab Jenny's arm. "Don't listen to her lies. We have something real." "Don't touch her," Holly snarled, and divine power flared around her. "You don't get to manipulate her anymore." The moon goddess materialized above the celebration, her presence causing every wolf present to drop to their knees. "Alpha Harold Friedman," she said, her voice carrying divine judgment. "You have weaponized my sacred gift. You have turned bonds meant to heal into tools of destruction. As you have targeted the kindest souls in your territory and used their compassion to destroy them." "Your Grace, I can explain," Harold started. "Silence." The word reverberated with power. "You will experience what you have inflicted. 7 years. 7 bonds with 7 healers and empaths. Each will reject you using your exact methods. And unlike your victims, you will not have the mercy of death to escape the pain." Harold's face went white as divine magic struck his chest, had his eyes locked onto a she-wolf in the crowd, one of his earlier victims, now watching with grim satisfaction. The mate bond hit him like lightning, genuine and overwhelming. I watched his expression transform into desperate longing. the she-wolf, a healer named Alice Joyce, who'd barely survived Harold's rejection 5 years ago, looked at him with utter contempt. "You?" she said coldly. "My mate? How tragic. Unfortunately, I require a partner with actual empathy. You're deficient in every quality that matters. I reject you completely." Harold collapsed, the pain of rejection written across his face. Real pain. The kind his 23 victims had experienced while he documented their suffering for future reference. 7 years, the moon goddess repeated. "Perhaps by the end, you'll understand why healers and empaths deserve protection, not exploitation." She turned to the assembled pack. "That the Regional Alpha Council of the Eastern Territories is hereby dissolved for complicity in enabling these crimes. Interim leadership will be established under direct divine supervision until proper governance can be restored." The council members who'd benefited from Harold's political maneuvering looked stricken, but none dared protest. The goddess vanished, leaving Harold on his knees experiencing his first rejection while his pack witnessed the fall of an alpha they'd trusted. And Holly moved to Jenny's side, offering comfort to the she-wolf, who'd narrowly escaped becoming victim 24. Around the celebration grounds, pack members were approaching other survivors, offering apologies for not seeing the pattern, for not speaking up, for allowing Harold to operate with impunity for so long. Justice had come to the Eastern Territories, and across 4 other territories, similar scenes were playing out simultaneously. Through the Divine Communication Network, and I monitored the other interventions as they unfolded. In the southern reaches, Adrian Martin was being confronted at his estate by an enforcer team led by a wolf named Stuart Love. Adrian's pattern of corporate raids through romantic relationships was being exposed in front of the business partners he'd manipulated for years. "Target is attempting to bribe his way out of judgment," Stuart reported. "He's offering to return assets, pay restitution, anything to avoid divine punishment. Denied, and I sent back. His victims can't be bought off, neither can the goddess." "Understood. Proceeding with sentencing." In the Western Mountains, Brian Orozco's extended degradation practices were being revealed to a pack that had considered him a model alpha. The psychological destruction he'd inflicted on 9 she-wolves, some of whom were institutionalized and unable to attend, was documented in horrifying detail. "The Western Mountain Council is refusing to step down," Eraziel reported from that location. "They're claiming divine intervention violates pack sovereignty." "What's their wolf count versus ours?" I asked. "They have territorial advantage and pack loyalty. We have divine authority and righteous fury. It could go either way. Then make it clear. Cooperate or face the same judgment as Brian. They're protecting him because they profit from his crimes. That makes them complicit. Delivering ultimatum now." Minutes later, council has agreed to resign. Apparently, Edu, the sight of Brian experiencing his first rejection, convinced them that divine punishment wasn't negotiable. Across all 47 interventions, the pattern repeated. Corrupt alphas were confronted, evidence was presented, and the moon goddess delivered judgment that couldn't be escaped or negotiated away. Some alphas accepted their sentences with resignation. Others fought, attempting to use pack loyalty or political connections to avoid consequences. None succeeded. By midnight, all 47 corrupt alphas were experiencing their first mate bond rejections. The she-wolves who'd survived their cruelty were witnessing justice being served. And pack members across 5 territories were grappling with the revelation that wolves they'd trusted had been systematically destroying vulnerable females for personal gain. If watching corrupt alphas face consequences gives you hope that justice can prevail over power, subscribe if you're yet to, because the reformation of Werewolf Society is just beginning. I received a communication from the moon goddess. All primary interventions complete. Casualties? I checked reports from all 50 enforcer teams. 0 divine casualties. 3 minor injuries from pack members attempting to defend their alphas. All injuries treated and healed. No mortal fatalities. Excellent work. Return to the hall for debriefing. Divine light flared, and then all 50 enforcers materialized back in the hall of eternal judgment. We looked exhausted but satisfied. Justice had been served without the civil war Raziel had feared. The moon goddess addressed us with visible pride. Tonight, you demonstrated that power does not exempt you from accountability, that abuse hidden in plain sight can be exposed, that the wolves I task with protecting sacred bonds take that responsibility seriously. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across all of us. But tonight's interventions are only the beginning. Tomorrow, we begin the work of rebuilding governance structures that prevent future abuse, of supporting the she-wolves who've suffered, of ensuring this never happens again. Your Grace, Holly spoke up, the Victim Testimony Network wants to be involved in the rebuilding process. They don't just want justice for what happened, they want to help prevent it from happening to others. Then they shall be. The goddess smiled. In fact, I'm establishing a new division within the divine enforcement structure, the Mate Bond Protection Council, comprised of both celestial enforcers and mortal survivors who understand the patterns of abuse from lived experience. She gestured, and Suzanne, Melinda, Blanca, Paige, and 24 other she-wolves materialized in the hall. They looked around in awe at finding themselves in the celestial realm. You've already been conducting your own investigations, the goddess said to them. You've supported each other through recovery. You've found the strength to demand accountability when everyone else wanted you to stay quiet. Now I'm asking you to help build something better. What would this council do? Suzanne asked. Monitor pack dynamics for signs of mate bond exploitation. Provide support and resources to wolves experiencing manipulation. Investigate complaints that mortal pack leadership might dismiss, and most importantly, ensure that survivors' voices are centered in policies meant to protect them. The she-wolves looked at each other, then back at the goddess. We'll do it, Suzanne said. On one condition. The goddess raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating with a deity? You taught us to speak up for ourselves, Suzanne replied with a slight smile. So yes, our condition is that the council has real authority, not just advisory capacity. We don't want to be symbolic victims trotted out for publicity, and we want actual power to investigate and intervene. The moon goddess's smile widened. Granted. The Mate Bond Protection Council will have full investigative authority, equal to divine enforcers in mate bond cases. You'll receive celestial training, divine protection, and resources to operate across all territories. She turned to me. Enforcer Connor, you'll oversee their training. You've proven capable of both investigation and understanding the systemic issues that enable individual crimes. And I'm promoting you to Director of Celestial Enforcement, effective immediately. I blinked in shock. Your Grace, You dismantled a corruption network that had operated for decades. You exposed not just individual criminals, but the systems protecting them. You empowered victims to become advocates. You've earned this position. Her expression softened slightly. And you'll have help. Divine Commander Raziel is being assigned as your co-director. Together, you'll rebuild Werewolf governance to prevent future exploitation. Raziel appeared at my side, looking equally stunned. Your Grace, we're honored, but nothing, the goddess interrupted. You wanted a century off to rest. I'm giving you a century to reform supernatural society instead. Consider it a working vacation. Despite everything, I laughed. That's not exactly what we had in mind. No, but it's what the werewolf world needs. She grew serious again. The 47 alphas you judged tonight were symptoms of a larger disease, a culture that valued power over compassion, results over ethics, pack prosperity over individual welfare. Changing that culture requires more than punishing individual criminals. It requires rebuilding from the foundation up. She was right. Tonight we'd brought justice to 47 wolves, but hundreds of alphas across the territories still operated with similar mindsets, just carefully enough to avoid divine attention. Thousands of she-wolves lived in fear of rejection or manipulation. The entire mate bond system had been poisoned by wolves who'd weaponized sacred connections. We'll do it, I said, glancing at Raziel for confirmation. He nodded, despite his exhaustion. Then begin. The goddess waved her hand, and new files materialized: governance reform proposals, victim support structures, enforcement protocols, and training curricula for the new Mate Bond Protection Council. The work of rebuilding supernatural society stretched before us like a mountain range, daunting, difficult, and absolutely necessary. But as I looked around the hall at 50 divine enforcers who'd just executed the largest coordinated intervention in history, at 24 survivor she-wolves ready to transform their pain into protection for others, and at Raziel standing beside me ready to tackle impossible challenges together, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Real, tangible hope that werewolf society could become something better than it had been, that sacred bonds could be protected instead of weaponized, that vulnerable wolves could trust that someone would defend them. "Director Connor," the goddess said with a slight smile. "So, your first assignment, establish preliminary governance protocols for the 5 territories currently operating under interim divine supervision." "And mine?" Raziel asked. "Coordinate with territory leaders who weren't complicit in the corruption. Find wolves capable of leading with integrity and install them in positions of authority." She paused. "And if any existing leaders resist the reforms, remind them what happened to the 47 alphas who thought they were untouchable." "Understood, Your Grace." The goddess began dismissing the assembled enforcers, sending them to various tasks across the territories. Within minutes, the hall had mostly cleared, leaving just Raziel, myself, and the group of she-wolves who would form the Mate Bond Protection Council. "We should start with training protocols," Holly suggested. She'd been assigned as the council's tactical coordinator, responsible for teaching investigation techniques to wolves who'd never done enforcement work. "And support structures for current victims," Suzanne added. "There are probably hundreds of she-wolves right now experiencing manipulation who don't know they can get help." "Documentation standards," Melinda said. "We need consistent evidence gathering so complaints can't be dismissed as he said, she said situations." They were already thinking strategically, turning their experiences into actionable policies. These weren't broken victims waiting to be saved. They were warriors, ready to fight. "Tomorrow," I said, feeling the exhaustion of 7 days of preparation and 1 night of coordinated interventions catching up to me. "Tonight, rest. Tomorrow, we start building something better." The she-wolves nodded and were transported back to their respective territories by divine light. Raziel and I were finally alone in the Hall of Eternal Judgment. "So much for that century of vacation," he said wryly. "So much for that," I agreed, leaning against him. "But we're going to change the world, Raziel. Actually change it. Not just punish individual criminals, but reform the systems that created them." "I know." He wrapped his arms around me. "It's going to be exhausting, frustrating, and probably take longer than a century to fully implement. Probably. Worth it, though. Absolutely." We stood there in comfortable silence, him contemplating the monumental task ahead. Somewhere across 5 territories, 47 alphas were experiencing the first night of 7 years of judgment. Their victims were beginning the long process of healing. And the entire werewolf world was waking up to the reality that divine justice, once invoked, was inescapable. Tomorrow, we'd start rebuilding. Tonight, we'd rest. And somewhere in the Eastern Territories, a healer named Jenny, who'd almost become victim number 24, was going to sleep safe, surrounded by pack members who'd learned to protect vulnerable wolves instead of enabling their destruction. That alone made everything worth it. Chapter 8. Building Something Better. 6 weeks after the simultaneous interventions, I stood in what used to be the regional Alpha Council chambers of the Eastern Territories, watching Jenny conduct her first official investigation as a trainee member of the Mate Bond Protection Council. She'd transformed from the terrified she-wolf who'd nearly become Harold's 24th victim into a focused investigator with personal understanding of manipulation tactics. And now she was interviewing a young wolf named Danny Hudson, who'd filed a complaint about his alpha's courtship behavior. "And when did Alpha Dick Albright first suggest you sign the business partnership documents?" Jenny asked, her voice gentle but professional. Danny, a male wolf, which had surprised me initially, looked uncomfortable. "About 3 weeks into the relationship," He said it was just a formality, and that mates share resources, and it was easier to have everything legally documented. But you weren't officially mated yet? No. We'd acknowledged the bond but hadn't completed any ceremonies. Danny's hands twisted in his lap. I thought I was being paranoid, wondering why he needed legal documents so early. Everyone said I should trust my mate. Jenny glanced at the evidence crystal recording the interview. Did Alpha Albright ever make you feel inadequate? Suggest ways you should change to be worthy of him? Constantly. Danny's voice cracked slightly. My clothes were wrong. My friends were embarrassing. The way I talked about my family business was unprofessional. Every day, there was something else I needed to fix about myself. Classic pattern. Dick Albright hadn't been on our initial list of 47, but complaints filed in the aftermath of the interventions had flagged him as a potential exploiter. And now Jenny was documenting evidence that would determine whether he faced divine judgment or just required monitoring. You're doing excellent work, I told Jenny after Danny left with reassurances that the council would investigate thoroughly. Your questioning technique is improving. She smiled, though her expression remained serious. It's easier when I remember how Harold made me feel. Every tactic Danny described, I experienced. The difference is, I have the training to recognize patterns now, instead of thinking it was my fault. That was the power of the Mate Bond Protection Council. Survivors who understood exploitation from lived experience, now equipped with divine authority to investigate and intervene. They caught subtle signs that even experienced enforcers might miss. Holly entered the chamber, carrying files on 3 new complaints. We're getting reports faster than we can process them, she said, now dropping the stack on the desk. Apparently, word spread that the council actually takes complaints seriously. Wolves who've been suffering in silence for years are suddenly coming forward. I scanned the files. 2 involved potential mate bond exploitation. One was a she-wolf reporting that her alpha had been using similar isolation tactics Harold had perfected. The other was a male wolf whose mate had systematically destroyed his confidence while draining his family's resources. And the 3rd file made my blood run cold. This complaint is from the Western Mountains, I said slowly, lodged against interim alpha Guy Shepard, who we installed to replace Brian Orozco. Holly's expression darkened. Yeah. Seems our reformed leader has been courting a she-wolf named Paige Downey while simultaneously pressuring her to support his permanent appointment to alpha position. She's describing manipulation tactics that sound remarkably similar to Brian's pattern. We installed him 6 weeks ago. I felt fury building. He lasted 6 weeks before reverting to exploitation? Or, Holly said grimly, he was always corrupt and just better at hiding it than Brian. Remember, Guy was on the council that enabled Brian for years. Maybe that wasn't just complicity. Maybe it was collaboration. I pulled out my communication crystal. Raziel. No, we have a problem. He materialized moments later, still in formal robes from whatever diplomatic meeting he'd been conducting. What kind of problem? The kind where wolves we installed to reform governance are engaging in the same exploitation we removed their predecessors for. I showed him Guy's file. We need better vetting protocols. Raziel studied the complaint, his expression growing darker. We vetted him thoroughly. Background checks, interviews with pack members, psychological evaluation by divine counselors. He passed everything. Then the evaluation criteria are insufficient, I said flatly. We need to involve survivors in the vetting process. They'll spot warning signs that formal assessments miss. Agreed. He pulled out his own crystal, already drafting new protocols. I'll coordinate with Suzanne's team. They can review all interim leadership appointments and flag anyone showing concerning patterns. What about Guy? Jenny asked. Do we remove him immediately or monitor first? I considered. Immediate removal would send a message that reformed governance had zero tolerance for exploitation. But it would also destabilize the Western Mountains again, potentially causing the exact chaos we were trying to prevent. Monitor closely, I decided. Assign a Protection Council member to shadow him full-time. Document everything. If he's genuinely engaging in exploitation, we'll have irrefutable evidence. Yes, if this is a misunderstanding or exaggerated complaint, we'll know that too. I'll take the assignment, Holly volunteered. I've been wanting to check on the Western Mountains anyway. Brian's victims deserve follow-up support. After she left, Raziel pulled me aside. This is the 4th complaint against interim leadership this week. We're replacing corrupt alphas with wolves who turn corrupt within weeks. Oh, the system itself might be the problem. What do you mean? I mean, maybe the alpha position inherently attracts or creates corruption, concentrated power, minimal oversight, pack culture that discourages challenging leadership. He gestured helplessly. We are treating symptoms by removing individual corrupt alphas. But what if the structure of pack governance itself enables exploitation? I'd been thinking the same thing but hadn't wanted to voice it. Now, restructuring individual packs was one thing. Reimagining the fundamental nature of werewolf leadership was another entirely. The moon goddess asked us to rebuild from the foundation up, I said slowly. Maybe that means questioning whether the traditional alpha hierarchy should exist at all. That's revolutionary, Raziel said. Territory leaders will resist. Pack culture is built around alpha authority. Removing that would fundamentally change werewolf society. Good. Because werewolf society fundamentally needs changing. I pulled up statistics on the divine crystal. In 6 weeks, we've received 247 new complaints of potential mate bond exploitation. Some are ongoing situations we're investigating. Others are historical. Wolves reporting abuse from years ago that was never addressed because no one took them seriously. I enlarged the data visualization. 247 complaints in 6 weeks, Raziel. And those are just the wolves brave enough to come forward. How many others are still suffering in silence? He studied the numbers, his expression troubled. If this rate continues, we're looking at thousands of historical cases and hundreds of ongoing situations requiring intervention, which means the problem is systemic, not individual. I closed the crystal. We can't enforce our way out of cultural corruption. We need structural change. The moon goddess needs to hear this, Raziel said. She materialized before he finished the sentence, clearly having monitored our conversation. I'm already aware, she said, and you're correct. The problem is structural. Your Grace, I said carefully, are you suggesting we eliminate the alpha hierarchy entirely? I'm suggesting we evolve it. The goddess waved her hand, and holographic models of various governance structures appeared. Traditional pack hierarchy served a purpose when werewolves lived in small and isolated groups requiring strong centralized leadership for survival. But supernatural society has grown more complex. Perhaps it's time for governance to reflect that complexity. She pulled up specific models. Council-based leadership with rotating positions, democratic selection of pack leaders with term limits, separation of powers between governance, justice, and resource management. A mandatory oversight by independent bodies like your Mate Bond Protection Council. Territory leaders will never accept this, Raziel said. You're asking them to give up concentrated power. I'm not asking. The goddess's voice carried divine authority. I'm implementing. The 47 corrupt alphas we judged demonstrated that unchecked power inevitably corrupts. But the complaints against interim leadership prove that simply replacing individual wolves doesn't solve systemic problems. She turned to me directly. Director Connor, you have 6 months to develop comprehensive governance reform proposals. Use the Mate Bond Protection Council's insights. Consult with survivors who understand how power structures enable abuse. Design systems with built-in accountability that don't rely on individual leader integrity. And if territory leaders resist implementation, I asked, then they demonstrate they value power over pack welfare and face the same judgment as the wolves we removed. Her expression was unyielding. This reformation isn't optional. It's necessary for werewolf society's survival. She vanished, leaving Raziel and me staring at the governance models still floating in the air. 6 months to redesign supernatural civilization, Raziel said faintly. No pressure. We need help, I said, already pulling out my communication crystal. Suzanne, can you gather the full Protection Council? Emergency session. Within the hour, 26 survivor she-wolves and 3 male survivors assembled in the Eastern Territories Council chamber. I explained the goddess's mandate and watched their expressions shift from surprise to determination. You want us to help design new pack governance? Suzanne asked. I want you to design governance that would have protected you from the wolves who hurt you, I corrected. You understand how power structures enable exploitation better than any celestial enforcer. What systems would have prevented Harold from operating for 15 years? What oversight would have caught Todd's pattern earlier? What protections would have saved Jamie and Isabel? The room fell silent as they considered. Independent Investigation Authority, Melinda said finally. Harold operated because the regional council dismissed complaints. If there'd been an external body with power to investigate regardless of local leadership preference. Term limits, Blanca added. Todd maintained power for decades, which let him perfect his tactics. If alphas rotated out of leadership regularly, they couldn't establish the long-term patterns that enable systematic abuse. Victim advocacy built into governance structure, Paige said quietly. She still spoke softly, but her voice carried new strength. Brian destroyed 9 she-wolves over 20 years. If even one of us had someone in power listening, really listening, he would have been stopped earlier. Ideas began flowing. Mandatory transparency in alpha decision-making. Resource allocation oversight by independent auditors. Unpack member voting rights on major decisions. Formal channels for complaints that couldn't be dismissed by the wolves being accused. This is good, I said, documenting everything. But we need to go deeper. Why did pack members enable corrupt alphas? What cultural factors make wolves complicit in abuse, even when they recognize it? Fear, Holly said bluntly. Challenging an alpha means risking pack standing, resources, safety. Yet the power imbalance is so extreme that most wolves choose silent complicity over dangerous resistance. Prosperity, Guy Shepherd said, having arrived late to the session. Several Protection Council members stiffened at his presence, but I'd allowed him to attend under close supervision. I enabled Brian because his corruption benefited the pack economically. We had resources, territory, political influence. It was easy to tell myself the she-wolves he destroyed were acceptable casualties for pack prosperity. The honesty was uncomfortable but valuable. So we need governance that distributes power enough that no single wolf can become untouchable, I summarized. And we need cultural shift that values individual welfare over collective prosperity gained through exploitation. That's asking wolves to fundamentally change how they think about pack loyalty, Raziel said. Good, Suzanne replied. Because pack loyalty that requires ignoring abuse isn't loyalty, it's complicity, and we're done being complicit. Over the next 6 months, we built something unprecedented in werewolf history. The Mate Bond Protection Council expanded to 50 members across 5 territories, with authority to investigate any alpha regardless of political connections. Suzanne led development of investigation protocols that combined celestial enforcement techniques with survivor-informed understanding of manipulation patterns. Raziel coordinated with the few territory leaders who genuinely supported reform to pilot new governance structures. The Eastern Territories became the first to implement council-based leadership with term limits and mandatory transparency. The initial resistance from traditionalists faded when pack members realized they had actual voice in decisions affecting their lives. Holly's investigation of Guy Shepherd concluded with his removal from interim leadership and assignment to the Mirror Realm for attempting to exploit Paige Downey. The Western Mountains selected their new leadership through democratic vote. First time in recorded werewolf history that pack members chose their alpha instead of having power inherited or claimed through combat. I spent those months traveling between territories, conducting training sessions for new Protection Council members, reviewing governance proposals, and slowly, painstakingly, changing how werewolves thought about power and accountability. It wasn't smooth. And several territory leaders attempted to maintain traditional alpha authority. The moon goddess removed them with divine judgment that made clear reform wasn't negotiable. Some pack members resisted cultural change, clinging to familiar hierarchies even when those hierarchies had enabled their own suffering. But gradually, things shifted. Complaints of mate bond exploitation didn't stop. 200 years of cultural corruption couldn't be erased in 6 months. But they were being taken seriously now, investigated thoroughly, addressed with real consequences instead of dismissals about personal relationship issues. She-wolves who'd spent decades believing rejection meant they were worthless began understanding that systematic manipulation wasn't their fault. Male wolves like Danny Hudson, who'd suffered exploitation in silence because alphas can't be victims, found support and validation. And slowly, pack by pack, territory by territory, werewolf society began transforming from a hierarchy that enabled the powerful to exploit the vulnerable into a system with actual accountability. 6 months after the simultaneous interventions, I stood in the Hall of Eternal Judgment, presenting the final governance reform proposal to the Moon Goddess. "This is comprehensive," she said, reviewing the holographic document that represented thousands of hours of work by survivors, enforcers, and reformist territory leaders. Council-based governance, term limits, independent oversight, victim advocacy, mandatory transparency, democratic selection of leaders. She looked up at me. "This fundamentally changes werewolf civilization." "That's the goal, Your Grace," I replied. "Incremental change wasn't sufficient. We needed systemic transformation." "And you believe this will prevent future exploitation?" "I believe it creates structures that make exploitation harder to hide and easier to address," I said carefully. "And no system is perfect. Corrupt wolves will always exist. But this framework ensures they can't operate with impunity for decades while everyone looks away." The goddess studied the proposal for a long moment, then smiled. "Approved. Implementation begins immediately across all territories." She waved her hand, and divine proclamation scrolled across the celestial realm, visible to every werewolf across 5 territories. By order of the Moon Goddess, a werewolf governance undergoes mandatory reformation effective immediately. Traditional alpha hierarchy is abolished. New governance structures, as detailed in the Celestial Reform Mandate, will be implemented within 90 days. Non-compliance will result in divine intervention and removal of leadership. The supernatural world erupted in chaos. Some packs celebrated, finally structure that protected them instead of enabling their exploitation. Others protested, "How dare celestial authorities interfere with ancient pack traditions?" Territory leaders scrambled to implement new systems or resist implementation and face consequences. But the goddess had spoken, and divine mandates weren't suggestions. "You've started a revolution," Raziel said, finding me in my office 3 days later while I coordinated implementation across territories, simultaneously resisting and embracing reform. "We've started necessary change," I corrected. Whether it becomes revolution or evolution depends on how wolves respond. Some territories are adapting smoothly, others are threatening rebellion. Let them threaten. I pulled up resistance reports. The Moon Goddess removed 47 corrupt alphas in one night. She'll remove resistant territory leaders just as efficiently if they refuse reform. And if entire packs resist? If this triggers actual civil war? I met his eyes. Then we fight to protect wolves who deserve governance that doesn't exploit them. We fight for she-wolves like Jamie and Isabel, who died because no one protected them. We fight for the next generation who shouldn't have to choose between pack loyalty and personal safety. Raziel smiled. "There's the revolutionary I fell in love with. I'm not a revolutionary. And I'm just someone who's tired of watching wolves suffer while everyone pretends systemic abuse is complicated. That's exactly what makes you revolutionary." A communication crystal flared. Suzanne reporting successful implementation in the southern reaches. Then another. Holly documenting resistance in northern territories. Then dozens more. Protection Council members across 5 territories navigating the messy, complicated, necessary work of transforming society. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't finished. But somewhere in the eastern territories, a young healer named Jenny was conducting investigations that would protect vulnerable wolves. Somewhere in the western mountains, democratic leadership was learning to govern without exploiting their people. and somewhere across 5 territories, she-wolves were going to sleep knowing that if their mates tried to manipulate them, someone would actually listen when they complained. Now, that was worth the chaos. That was worth everything. Chapter 9. Ripple Effects. 1 year after the Reformation began, I received an invitation that surprised me. You are cordially invited to the mating ceremony of Jenny Myers and Alexander Garcia. Eastern Territories. Full moon celebration. Jenny, the healer who'd nearly become Harold's 24th victim, who'd transformed into one of the Protection Council's most skilled investigators, was getting mated. I showed the invitation to Raziel. She's found someone. After everything Harold put her through, I'm amazed she was willing to try again, he said. The invitation includes a note. I read it aloud. Thank you for showing me that rejection wasn't my fault and that real love doesn't require me to become someone else. I want you to see what healthy mate bonds look like. We attended the ceremony together, arriving as the Eastern Territories pack gathered under the full moon. Yet the changes in pack culture were immediately visible. Instead of the hierarchical seating arrangements I'd seen at Todd's rejection ceremony, wolves mingled freely regardless of rank. Instead of a single alpha presiding from a throne, a council of 5 leaders shared the platform. Jenny looked radiant in traditional mating robes, but it was her expression that struck me. Confident, joyful, completely at ease. Nothing like the nervous and eager to please she-wolf Harold had been grooming for exploitation. Alexander stood beside her, a gentle-faced wolf whose genuine adoration was written across his features. When they recited their mating vows, his voice shook with emotion. I promise to love you exactly as you are, he said. Not who I want you to become. Not a version of you that serves my needs. You, Jenny. Just you. She was crying. I promise to trust you with my real self. Not a performance designed to keep you interested. Not a carefully managed facade. My actual messy, complicated healer self. The vows were a direct response to Harold's manipulation. Promises to be authentic instead of performative, to love unconditionally instead of conditionally. When the ceremony concluded and the celebration began, Jenny found me in the crowd. Thank you for coming, she said, pulling me into a hug. I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to trust another mate bond after Harold. But the Protection Council's training taught me to recognize genuine connection versus manipulation. Alexander is real. We're real. I can see that, I said warmly. You both look incredibly happy. We are. She glanced back at her new mate, who was chatting easily with pack members. The difference is staggering, Enforcer Connor. With Harold, I was constantly anxious, always wondering what I'd done wrong, trying to fix myself to deserve his attention. With Alexander, I just exist. Yeah, and that's enough for him. That's how it should always be, I said. I know that now. Her expression grew more serious. Because you showed me. You and the other survivors who built the Protection Council. You taught me that mate bonds are supposed to feel safe, not stressful. Over her shoulder, I spotted Alice Joyce, the healer who'd delivered Harold's first rejection during his divine punishment. She was dancing with a male wolf, laughing genuinely for the first time I'd seen. Is that Alice's new mate? I asked. Jordan Fletcher. They bonded 6 months ago. Jenny smiled. Watching Harold experience rejection after rejection for a year convinced Alice she could try again. Jordan is patient, kind, everything Harold wasn't. Seeing them together gives me hope for all Harold's victims. The ceremony transformed into a full celebration, and I circulated through the gathering, observing how profoundly the culture had shifted. Unmated she-wolves weren't desperately trying to catch alpha attention. They were confidently socializing, pursuing their own interests, treating potential mates as equals rather than prizes to win. Male wolves weren't performing dominance displays to prove worthiness. They were engaging in genuine conversations, showing vulnerability, building authentic connections. This was what healthy pack dynamics looked like when exploitation wasn't normalized. Council leader Roberto Lang approached me, and one of the 5 wolves governing the Eastern Territories through the new democratic system. Enforcer Connor, I wanted to thank you personally. I was skeptical of the governance reforms initially, thought they'd create chaos and weaken pack cohesion. And now? I asked. Now I see that strong packs aren't built on fear of authority. They're built on trust that leadership actually serves pack welfare. He gestured around the celebration. Look at this. Everyone here knows they have voice, have rights, have protection if someone tries to exploit them. That creates more loyalty than any alpha's dominance ever did. How's the council system working practically? I asked. Any implementation challenges? Dozens, he admitted. Decision-making takes longer with 5 leaders instead of 1. We have more debate, more disagreement, more complexity. But those debates surface problems we'd have missed under single alpha rule. The diversity of perspective makes our governance stronger, even if it's messier. This was the feedback I'd been hearing across reform territories. Initial chaos giving way to more stable, responsive governance. Not perfect, but better. Suzanne found me near the buffet tables, looking healthy and energized in ways I'd never seen during my Pine Haven investigation. Director Connor, she greeted with a slight smile. Enjoying the celebration? Immensely. How are things in the Protection Council? Overwhelming in the best way. She pulled out her communication crystal, showing statistics. We're processing 300 complaints per month now, up from 200 when we started. Not because exploitation is increasing, because wolves finally believe someone will take them seriously. 300 monthly complaints across 5 territories, I said, calculating. That's substantial investigation load. It is. Oh, we've expanded to 75 council members and we're still stretched thin. She closed the crystal. But every complaint we investigate, every wolf we protect, every corrupt alpha we expose, it reinforces that the system actually works now. Word spreads. More wolves come forward. The cycle of silence is breaking. Any concerning patterns emerging? Her expression darkened slightly. Yes, actually. We're seeing more sophisticated exploitation tactics. Corrupt wolves learning to hide their manipulation better, knowing they're under scrutiny. Less obvious isolation, more subtle gaslighting, carefully documented evidence of mutual decision-making that masks coercion. They're adapting, I said grimly. They are, but so are we. Suzanne's smile returned. Every new tactic they develop, we document and train council members to recognize. It's an arms race between exploiters and protectors. But for the first time in werewolf history, the protectors have institutional support and divine authority. We're winning. Across the celebration, I spotted Todd Ford. He looked diminished, older than his 32 years, moving with careful restraint, keeping to the edges of the gathering. I'd heard he'd completed his 7-year sentence 3 months ago, experiencing 7 devastating rejections that had supposedly transformed him. He noticed me watching and approached slowly, head bowed respectfully. Director Connor, he said quietly, I wanted to apologize, again, for everything. I'd heard this apology before. He'd sent formal letters to every one of his victims, to the Protection Council, to the goddess herself. The question was whether the remorse was genuine or performative. How are you adjusting? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Badly. Every day I remember something else I did, some cruelty I inflicted. And I'm horrified I'd ever thought that behavior was acceptable. He looked around the celebration with haunted eyes. Seeing healthy mate bonds like Jenny and Alexander's, that's what I destroyed for 6 she-wolves, what I almost destroyed for you. You destroyed it for more than 6, I corrected. You taught other alphas your tactics. Your influence spread exploitation across territories. I know, his voice cracked. That's what makes it unbearable. At the 7 rejections I experienced, that was my punishment. But living with the knowledge of how many wolves I hurt, how many lives I ruined, how my lessons poisoned other alphas, that's my real sentence. And it doesn't end. I studied him, using 3 centuries of investigator instincts to assess sincerity. His pain appeared genuine. The shame in his posture, the careful way he avoided approaching she-wolves, the haunted look when he observed happy couples, all suggested real transformation. But I'd been fooled by Todd before, during my 6-month undercover investigation, when his charm had seemed so genuine. What are you doing now? I asked. Working with the Protection Council as a consultant, he said, teaching investigators how to recognize manipulation tactics from the exploiter's perspective. It's difficult, reliving my crimes, explaining my thought processes, showing wolves how predators operate. But if it prevents even one alpha from following my path, oh, it's worth the discomfort. That checked with what Suzanne had told me. Several reformed corrupt alphas had volunteered to help train investigators, providing insider perspective on exploitation strategies. And personally, I pressed, any romantic interests? He flinched. No, I don't trust myself with that kind of relationship. Maybe someday, after more time, more therapy, more proof I've actually changed. But right now, at the idea of courting someone, of feeling that pull toward manipulation, terrifies me. Good, I said bluntly. You should be terrified. Fear of repeating past behavior is healthy. I am. He met my eyes directly for the first time. And I'm grateful you exposed me when you did. If you'd waited even a few more months, I'd have destroyed Brandy Connor, the role you were playing. Another she-wolf's life ruined, another name on my list of victims. You stopped me from becoming even worse. The gratitude was uncomfortable but appeared genuine. Don't thank me for doing my job, I said. Thank the moon goddess for offering you redemption instead of permanent exile. I do, every day. He bowed again and retreated to the edge of the celebration, clearly uncomfortable but determined to be present, to witness healthy pack dynamics, to keep remembering why his previous behavior was unforgivable. Raziel appeared at my side, having observed the conversation from a distance. Do you believe him? That he's actually changed? I believe he's terrified of who he was, I said carefully. Whether that fear translates into permanent behavioral change or just more sophisticated manipulation remains to be seen. Cynical, realistic, Todd's charming, intelligent, and spent decades perfecting deception. 7 years of divine punishment might have transformed him. Or it might have taught him to hide his true nature better. I watched him decline an offer to dance with a young she-wolf, keeping careful distance. Time will tell, but I'm not taking chances. He's under Permanent Protection Council monitoring. The celebration continued into the early hours, and I found myself talking with dozens of pack members about their experiences with governance reform. The conversations revealed complex realities, and some wolves thrived under the new system, finally able to voice concerns, participate in decisions, trust that leadership served their interests. Others struggled with the loss of clear hierarchical structure, uncomfortable with shared power and democratic processes that required active participation rather than passive obedience. But even the wolves who found reform challenging generally acknowledged it was better than the previous system that had enabled wolves like Harold, Todd, and Brian to operate unchecked. Near dawn, as the celebration wound down, Jenny and Alexander prepared to leave for their mating retreat. Before departing, Jenny addressed the gathered pack. I want to thank everyone who supported me through recovery after Harold's manipulation, she said. Especially the Protection Council members who taught me to recognize healthy love versus exploitation. And I want to say something to any wolf here who's currently experiencing manipulation. She paused, and her voice strengthening. You're not crazy. You're not too sensitive. You're not imagining it. If someone who claims to love you constantly makes you feel inadequate, if they isolate you from support systems, if they require you to change fundamental parts of yourself to deserve their affection, that's not love. That's exploitation. And you can get help now. The Protection Council exists to protect you. Use it. Applause rippled through the gathering, and then I watched several wolves pull out communication crystals to note the council's contact information. Jenny's public testimony would likely generate more complaints. Wolves who'd been suffering in silence, realizing their experiences matched described patterns. As Raziel and I prepared to leave the celebration, Alice Joyce approached us. Director Connor, I wanted to show you something, she said, pulling out a leather journal. After Harold's first rejection during his divine punishment, I started documenting my recovery process, therapy, support groups, slowly learning to trust again. I'm publishing it as a resource for other survivors. She opened the journal to a specific page. This entry is from 6 months ago, right when Jordan and I bonded. I wrote, For years, I thought Harold's rejection meant I was inherently unlovable. Now I understand it meant he was inherently incapable of real love. The difference changes everything. I read the entry, feeling the weight of pain transformed into wisdom. You're helping other wolves heal. That's the goal. The Protection Council investigates current abuse and prevents future exploitation. But those of us who survived need resources for recovery too, so I'm creating them. She smiled. Turns out using my healing abilities to help other survivors process trauma is more fulfilling than anything I did before Harold's manipulation. Found purpose through pain, I observed. He found purpose despite pain, she corrected gently. I refuse to be grateful for what Harold did, but I can be grateful for who I became while healing from it. The distinction mattered. Survivors shouldn't have to redeem their trauma by making something positive from it. But if they chose to transform pain into purpose, that choice deserved recognition. We left the Eastern Territories as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Behind us, Jenny and Alexander's mating celebration had been the first I'd attended, where every wolf present seemed genuinely happy for the couple, not performing social obligation or calculating political advantages. That was progress, real, measurable progress. Do you ever wonder if we're doing enough? Raziel asked as we traveled through divine light. 300 complaints per month means 300 wolves experiencing exploitation. We're responding faster than before. But they're still being hurt. We can't prevent every instance of abuse, I said. Corrupt wolves will always exist, but we've created systems that make exploitation harder to hide and easier to address. That's not perfect, but it's substantially better than what existed before. Is substantially better good enough? I thought about Jamie, who'd walked off that cliff because she'd internalized Todd's rejection as proof she was worthless. About Isabel, who'd overdosed because the shame of exploitation felt unbearable. About the countless wolves who'd suffered in silence because no one would listen. No, I admitted. Substantially better isn't good enough. We need to keep improving, keep refining, keep pushing towards systems that actually protect vulnerable wolves instead of just responding after they're hurt. So the work continues. The work continues. I smiled despite the weight of it. But tonight, I watched a she-wolf who almost became a predator's victim celebrate mating with someone who loves her authentically. I watched survivors transform pain into purpose. I watched pack members embrace governance that protects them. That's worth celebrating, even while acknowledging how much work remains. We materialized in the Hall of Eternal Judgment, where the Moon Goddess was reviewing Protection Council reports. "How was the ceremony?" she asked without looking up. "Beautiful, healthy, and exactly what mate bonds should look like." I paused. But Alice raised a good point. We're focused on investigation and prevention, but survivors need recovery resources too. Agreed. The goddess closed the reports. I'm authorizing expansion of the Protection Council's mandate to include survivor support services, therapy, support groups, educational resources about healthy relationships. The council already has survivor expertise. Let's use it comprehensively. She pulled up new organizational charts. Additionally, I'm implementing mandatory mate bond education in all territories. Before wolves can pursue mating, they must complete training on consent, healthy relationship dynamics, and recognizing manipulation. Prevention through education rather than just response to exploitation. That's going to be controversial, Raziel said. Traditionalists will claim it interferes with natural mate selection. Traditionalists can adapt or face divine judgment for obstruction, the goddess replied. We've spent a year proving that reform works. Now we're expanding it. She was right. The years since the simultaneous interventions had demonstrated that systemic change, while messy and complicated, produced better outcomes than the previous system. Complaints were being addressed, survivors were healing. Yet governance was becoming more accountable. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. And in werewolf society that had normalized exploitation for centuries, better was revolutionary. "There's one more thing," the goddess said. "Harold Friedman has completed his sentence. He's requested permission to address the Protection Council." I straightened. "Why?" "He wants to formally apologize to his victims and offer restitution. He's also volunteering to work with the council, similar to Todd, providing insider perspective on predatory tactics." "Do we trust him?" I asked. "No," the goddess said bluntly. "But we monitor him, and if his cooperation helps protect even one future victim, it's worth the risk of him attempting manipulation again." She was right, though it felt uncomfortable. Reformed predators offering insight into exploitation tactics was valuable for investigation training, but putting them in contact with the organization protecting their potential victims created risk. Supervised consultation only, I decided. No direct contact with current victims. All interactions recorded and reviewed by Protection Council leadership. "Agreed," the goddess said. "Implement appropriate safeguards." As I left the hall to begin coordinating Harold's supervised consultation protocols, I reflected on how far we'd come in 1 year. Him from 47 simultaneous interventions, exposing corruption to comprehensive governance reform, to survivor-led protection systems, to former predators, volunteering to prevent future exploitation. The transformation was remarkable, but the work was far from finished. Somewhere in the 5 territories, a wolf was experiencing manipulation right now. Someone was being isolated, criticized, gaslit into believing they deserved mistreatment. And the Protection Council would investigate, would intervene, would protect them. But I wanted a world where those investigations weren't necessary, where every wolf understood healthy relationship dynamics well enough to recognize exploitation immediately, where predators couldn't operate because their tactics were universally known and universally rejected. That world didn't exist yet, but we were building it. One investigation, one reform, one survivor finding their voice at a time. And someday, maybe not in my lifetime, but someday, the werewolf world might become a place where the sacred mate bonds the moon goddess created were actually treated as sacred. That was worth fighting for. That was worth everything. Chapter 10. Full Circle. 5 years after I'd walked into that bakery in Pine Haven, pretending to be a nobody named Brandy, I stood in the Hall of Eternal Judgment, reviewing statistics that would have seemed impossible back then. Mate bond exploitation complaints, down 73% from peak levels. Successful Protection Council interventions, 4,847 cases across 5 territories. Governance councils operating under reformed structures, 100% of packs. She-wolves and he-wolves receiving survivor support services, 12,236. Corrupt alphas removed from power through divine judgment, 193. The numbers told a story of transformation, but it was the individual stories behind those statistics that mattered most. Director Connor? Holly appeared in the doorway, now Deputy Director of the Protection Council, after 5 years of exceptional service. "The commemoration ceremony is starting soon. Are you ready?" I closed the statistical reports and followed her to the Eastern Territories, where wolves from across 5 territories had gathered for an event 5 years in the making. The Jamie and Isabel Memorial Garden. After years of fundraising, planning, and construction, the Survivors Network had built a permanent memorial honoring every wolf who'd died from mate bond exploitation. Not just Jamie and Isabel, but dozens of others whose deaths had been dismissed as accidents, suicides, or natural causes, while the predators who'd destroyed them walked free. Until now. The garden was beautiful, healing herbs planted by Alice Joyce, whose abilities had been weaponized by Harold and were now used to help survivors recover. Pathways designed by Suzanne, whose architectural talents had been exploited by Todd and were now employed creating safe spaces for vulnerable wolves. Sculptures carved by survivors, whose creativity had been suppressed by manipulative mates and was finally being expressed freely. Hundreds of wolves gathered around the central memorial stone, which bore the names of 73 confirmed deaths from mate bond exploitation across the past 50 years. 73 lives ended because corrupt wolves had weaponized sacred connections and because systems had protected predators instead of victims. Never again. And Jamie's parents stood at the front of the gathering, elderly wolves who'd lost their daughter to Todd's cruelty and had spent 5 years advocating for reform that came too late to save her, but might save countless others. Her father, Jake Hull, addressed the crowd with a voice strengthened by 5 years of grief, transformed into purpose. "My daughter walked off a cliff because an alpha made her believe she was worthless," he said. She died thinking his rejection proved she didn't deserve to live. And for years, I was angry. At Todd, at the system that protected him, at myself for not seeing the warning signs. He paused, emotion evident but controlled. But 5 years ago, divine enforcer Brandy Connor exposed the truth. My daughter's death wasn't her failure. It was Todd's crime. And more importantly, it was a systemic failure that this reformation has begun to address. He gestured to the memorial stone. And these 73 names represent wolves who died because we, as a society, chose to protect powerful predators instead of vulnerable victims. This memorial ensures we never forget that choice. And the Protection Council, the governance reforms, the survivor support systems, these ensure we never make that choice again. Applause rippled through the gathering, but it was muted by the weight of what those 73 names represented. 73 preventable deaths. And 73 wolves who should have been protected and weren't. Isabel's mother, Marion Harrison, spoke next. "My daughter gave a corrupt alpha access to our family mining operation because she thought love required sacrifice. She died believing his rejection meant she'd failed him. But the truth is he failed her. He exploited her compassion, destroyed her confidence, and left her to suffer the consequences of his manipulation alone." Her voice grew stronger. "For 5 years, I've worked with the Protection Council to make sure no other parent loses their child to mate bond exploitation. We've investigated hundreds of cases. We've protected thousands of vulnerable wolves, and we've held corrupt alphas accountable in ways that would have seemed impossible before Director Connor's investigation exposed the systematic nature of this abuse." She turned to face the memorial stone. "Isabel, I'm sorry we didn't protect you in time, but I promise you, we're protecting others now. Your death wasn't meaningless. It was the catalyst that made society finally acknowledge what it had been ignoring for too long." I felt Raziel's hand slip into mine as we stood among the crowd. 5 years of reformation work, exhausting, frustrating, often heartbreaking work, had led to this moment. A society publicly acknowledging its failures and committing to do better. The moon goddess materialized above the memorial, and her presence causing every wolf present to bow respectfully. "These 73 wolves died because sacred bonds were weaponized," she said, her voice carrying across the garden. "They died because power structures protected predators. They died because cultural norms valued pack prosperity over individual welfare. And they died because too many wolves chose comfortable silence over difficult truth." She paused, letting those words settle. But their deaths were not in vain. And the reformation that began with Enforcer Connor's investigation has transformed supernatural society. Governance is more accountable. Protection systems are more robust. Cultural attitudes are shifting from accepting exploitation to actively preventing it. The goddess's gaze swept across the gathered wolves. But transformation is never finished. It requires constant vigilance, continuous improvement, ongoing commitment to choosing justice over convenience. And the wolves memorialized here deserve that commitment. And so do the wolves still living who might otherwise become future victims. She raised her hand, and divine light flowed into the memorial stone, making the carved names glow with celestial radiance. "I hereby consecrate this memorial as holy ground. Let it stand as permanent reminder of the cost of systemic failure. And let it inspire continued dedication to ensuring no more names are added to this list." The light faded, leaving the names glowing softly, a permanent celestial tribute to wolves who'd deserved protection and received destruction instead. After the formal ceremony concluded, the gathering shifted into something more celebratory. Survivors sharing recovery stories, Protection Council members networking across territories, families of the memorialized finding comfort and community with others who understood their loss. I found myself talking with Jenny, who now led the Eastern Territories Protection Council Division. She and Alexander had 2 young pups who were playing in the memorial garden with careful reverence. 5 years, she said, watching her children. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago that Harold was grooming me. Other times, it feels like yesterday. How are you managing? I asked. We'd maintained periodic contact over the years, and I knew her recovery hadn't been linear. Good months followed by difficult ones, of progress interrupted by setbacks, healing that happened in spirals rather than straight lines. Better, the nightmares are less frequent, the hypervigilance is more manageable, and Alexander has been patient through all of it, understanding that trauma recovery isn't a straight path. She smiled. The Protection Council work helps too. Every wolf I help protect, every manipulation tactic I expose. It reinforces that Harold's behavior was criminal. Not my fault. Her eldest pup, a 5-year-old named Riley, ran over excitedly. Mama, Mama, that lady said you're a hero who saves wolves. Jenny's expression softened. I'm not a hero, sweetie. I just help protect people who need it. That's what heroes do, Riley insisted, with the absolute certainty of childhood. After Jenny and her family moved on, I encountered Todd near the edge of the garden. He stood alone, staring at the memorial stone with an expression of profound anguish. Jamie's name is second from the top, he said quietly. I see it every time I close my eyes. 5 years of supervised rehabilitation had changed Todd visibly. The arrogant alpha who'd orchestrated rejections for personal gain was gone, replaced by a wolf who carried the weight of his crimes with visible pain. Whether the transformation was genuine or performed remained an open question, but his contributions to Protection Council training had been valuable enough that he remained under monitored consultation rather than exile. Do you think about her often? I asked. Every day. His voice was hollow. About all of them. The 6 I rejected directly, plus the dozens I taught my tactics to who went on to destroy their own victims. My consultation work with the council, it's penance, and necessary penance that doesn't come close to balancing what I took from the world. Penance isn't about balancing scales, I said. It's about preventing future harm. I know. Doesn't make it feel adequate. He turned to face me directly. Do you ever wonder if I'm lying? If this remorse is just more sophisticated manipulation? The blunt question surprised me. Constantly. Good, you should. He looked back at the memorial. I wonder that myself sometimes, as whether I've actually changed or just learned to perform redemption convincingly. The uncertainty is its own punishment, never being sure if my reformation is real. Then keep proving it, I said, through actions, not words, through protecting wolves instead of exploiting them, through decades of consistent behavior that demonstrates transformation. Decades, he repeated. I'm 37. If I live to normal werewolf lifespan, and I have potentially 300 more years to prove I've changed, that's a long time to maintain a performance. Or a long time to actually be different, I countered. Your choice, which it becomes. He nodded slowly and walked away, still carrying visible weight of past crimes. Whether that weight would keep him honest or crush him into new forms of dysfunction remained to be seen. As the commemoration ceremony transitioned into evening, I found a quiet spot in the garden with Raziel. 5 years, he said, echoing Jenny's words. From undercover investigation to comprehensive societal reform. That's remarkable progress. It's insufficient progress, I corrected. We're still getting 300 complaints monthly, still discovering cases where manipulation went undetected, still learning about tactics we don't know how to recognize yet. Always the perfectionist, always the realist. I leaned against him. But you're right that progress has been made. 5 years ago, wolves like Jamie died in silence while society looked away. Now we have systems, support, accountability. That matters. The goddess wants to talk to us, Raziel said, about next steps. We found her in the center of the memorial garden, contemplating the glowing names with an expression of profound sorrow. Your Grace, I said softly. 5 years of reformation has produced measurable improvements, she said without preamble. But the work is far from finished. I'm expanding your mandate." I'd suspected this was coming. To what? Global supernatural reform. Not just werewolves, all supernatural communities. Vampires, fae, shifters of various kinds. They all have power structures that enable exploitation. They all need the kind of systemic transformation you've implemented in werewolf territories. The scope was staggering. "Your Grace, that's enormous, yes." She turned to face us. "But necessary. The patterns you've exposed in werewolf society exist across supernatural communities. Powerful beings exploiting vulnerable ones. Systems protecting predators. Cultural norms normalizing abuse. And if we don't address it comprehensively, we're just moving the problem around instead of solving it." Raziel and I exchanged glances. 5 years of reformation work had been exhausting. Expanding to all supernatural communities would require decades, possibly centuries of similar effort. "We'll need significantly larger teams," I said, mind already calculating logistics. "Different cultural experts for each community. Adaptation of protection council models to species-specific dynamics. You'll have whatever resources you need," the goddess interrupted. "This is my primary directive for the next century. Reform supernatural society comprehensively, or watch it collapse under the weight of its own corruption." "When do we start?" Raziel asked. "You already have." The werewolf reformation has been observed by other supernatural communities. Some are implementing similar changes voluntarily. Others are resisting. Your job is to accelerate adoption among the willing and force compliance among the resistant. She pulled up holographic organizational charts showing massive expansion of the celestial enforcement structure. Holly becomes Director of Werewolf Operations, overseeing continued reform in the 5 territories. Suzanne leads the new Survivor Advocacy Division across all supernatural species. You two coordinate overall strategy and implementation. "That's a century-long project minimum," I said. "Likely longer," the goddess agreed. "But you asked for meaningful change. This is what meaningful change requires: sustained effort over generations, comprehensive rather than piecemeal reform, addressing root causes instead of symptoms." She was right. And everything we'd learned from werewolf reformation applied to broader supernatural society. The patterns of exploitation, the systems protecting predators, the cultural normalization of abuse. These weren't werewolf-specific problems. They were power structure problems that existed anywhere beings had significant ability to harm each other. "We'll do it," I said, feeling the weight of another century of exhausting work settling onto my shoulders. "I know you will." The goddess smiled. "That's why I chose you for the original investigation 5 years ago. Not because you were the most experienced enforcer, but because you understood that individual crimes exist within systemic contexts. That punishing one corrupt alpha was meaningless without addressing the culture that created him." She gestured at the memorial garden around us. "These 73 wolves died because of systemic failure. The reformation you led has prevented hundreds more deaths in werewolf territories alone. Imagine what comprehensive supernatural reform could prevent globally." The vision was compelling. A supernatural world where sacred bonds were actually sacred, where power came with accountability, where vulnerable beings received protection instead of exploitation. Worth fighting for, worth decades of exhausting work. "We'll need to start with assessment," Raziel said, and already shifting into strategic planning mode. "Identify which supernatural communities have the most severe exploitation issues, which have existing reform movements we can support, which will require forced intervention." "Already done," the goddess interrupted, pulling up comprehensive reports. "I've been monitoring supernatural communities for the past 5 years while you reformed werewolf territories. These assessments will guide your initial priorities." She was always 3 steps ahead. And as the commemoration ceremony concluded and wolves began departing, I took one last look at the memorial stone with its 73 glowing names: Jamie, Isabel, Joni, Gertrude, Marion, Maggie, and 67 others whose deaths had been preventable with better systems, better protection, better cultural values. Their names would glow for eternity, a permanent reminder of what happened when societies chose comfortable silence over difficult truth. But beside the memorial stone, And new plaques were being installed, honoring survivors who'd transformed pain into purpose, celebrating reformed governance that protected vulnerable beings, documenting the specific changes implemented over 5 years that had prevented future tragedies. The memorial wasn't just about mourning the past, it was about committing to a better future. 10 years after I'd laughed at Todd's rejection and revealed my true identity, I attended another mating ceremony. Hey, this one was in the vampire territories, where a survivor of blood bond exploitation, their equivalent of mate bond abuse, was celebrating bonding with someone who treated her as equal rather than food source. The ceremony incorporated reforms we'd implemented over the past 5 years of expanding supernatural governance transformation, independent oversight councils, survivor advocacy representatives, mandatory consent protocols, and all the systemic changes that made exploitation harder and protection easier. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was better and better, accumulated over decades and centuries, eventually became good, maybe even great. Director Connor, the vampire survivor said after the ceremony, "Thank you for bringing the reformation to our community. 5 years ago, I thought my exploitation was normal. Now I understand it was criminal." "Thank you for being brave enough to report it," I replied. Survivors speaking up is what makes reformation possible." She smiled and rejoined her new mate, moving with the confidence of someone who'd reclaimed her agency after years of having it systematically destroyed. Raziel found me watching the celebration with satisfaction. "Another successful intervention," he said. "Another community transformed. Another step toward comprehensive reform," I agreed. "How many more communities remain?" 17 major supernatural populations, plus dozens of minor ones. He pulled up progress reports. "At current pace, we're looking at 70 more years to achieve baseline reform across all communities." 70 years. Nearly a century total of reformation work. I'd be approaching 500 years old by the time comprehensive supernatural reform was complete. "Worth it, though," I said. "Oh, absolutely worth it." We stood together watching vampires celebrate a healthy blood bond, one based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than predatory exploitation. 5 years ago, this community had operated like werewolf territories before Reformation, with powerful vampires treating vulnerable ones as resources to be consumed. Now they had protection systems, accountability structures, and cultural shifts toward treating all beings as inherently valuable. Now the transformation was real, slow, messy, complicated, but real. My communication crystal flared. Holly reporting successful intervention in Werewolf Western Mountains, where a potential exploiter had been caught early thanks to improved detection systems. Then, Suzanne updating survivor support metrics showing continued improvement in recovery outcomes. Then dozens of other reports from investigators, advocates, and reformed community leaders across supernatural populations. The work continued. As it would always continue, because predators would always exist, systems would always need maintenance, and cultural values required constant reinforcement to prevent backsliding into exploitation. But now we had frameworks for addressing those eternal challenges. We had survivors empowered to protect others. We had reformed governance that prioritized accountability over power. We had communities learning that protecting vulnerable beings strengthened rather than weakened them. That was worth everything. "Ready to go home?" Raziel asked. Home was technically the Hall of Eternal Judgment, but over 10 years of reformation work, it had become more than just headquarters. It was the place where survivors found validation, where investigators coordinated protection, where systemic change was planned and implemented. It was the heart of a movement that had transformed supernatural society. "Ready?" I said. As we prepared to leave through divine light, I took one last look at the vampire celebration. Healthy bonds, protected vulnerable beings, reformed systems. This was what I'd fought for when I laughed at Todd's rejection 10 years ago. Not personal revenge, though that had been satisfying. Not individual justice, though 47 corrupt alphas serving sentences was appropriate. But comprehensive transformation of societies that had normalized exploitation for too long. We'd achieved that in werewolf territories, as we were achieving it across broader supernatural communities. And in another 70 years, maybe, just maybe, sacred bonds across all supernatural populations would actually be treated as sacred. That vision kept me fighting through exhausting decades of reformation work. That vision made it all worthwhile. Epilogue. 25 years later. I stood in the Hall of Eternal Judgment on the 25th anniversary of Todd's public rejection, at reviewing transformation statistics that would have seemed impossible when I'd first walked into that Pine Haven bakery. Mate bond exploitation across all supernatural communities, down 91% from baseline measurements, protection councils operating globally, 237 across 43 species, survivors receiving support services, 847,392 beings, reformed governance structures, 94% of supernatural communities, deaths from bond exploitation, 0 in the past 18 months, 0. And for 18 consecutive months, no supernatural being had died from mate bond, blood bond, soul bond, or any other form of sacred connection exploitation. That was the number that mattered most. The door opened and a familiar figure entered. No longer the nervous she-wolf I'd met 25 years ago, but a confident leader who'd spent decades transforming pain into purpose. Director Connor, Jenny said, now Global Director of the Protection Council Network, and the commemoration gathering is starting. 25 years, a quarter century since one investigation had sparked reformation that transformed supernatural civilization. We gathered in the expanded Jamie and Isabel Memorial Garden, which now honored 127 names, every confirmed death from bond exploitation over the past century. The number had stopped growing 18 months ago and would hopefully never increase again. Thousands of beings from dozens of species filled the garden. Werewolves, vampires, fae, shifters, and others, all connected by shared commitment to protecting sacred bonds. The moon goddess materialized above the gathering, her presence causing respectful silence. 25 years ago, divine enforcer Brandy Connor exposed systemic exploitation in werewolf territories, she began. That investigation sparked reformation that has since spread across supernatural communities globally. Today, we commemorate not just the progress achieved, but the eternal vigilance required to maintain it. She gestured to the memorial stone. These 127 names represent the cost of systemic failure. They are why we reformed, why we continue reforming, why we must never become complacent in protecting vulnerable beings from those who would exploit them. Her gaze swept across the gathered beings. But alongside mourning past failures, we celebrate current successes. 18 months without a single bond exploitation death, and 94% of communities operating under reformed governance, nearly 1 million survivors receiving support. These achievements represent decades of dedicated work by investigators, advocates, survivors, and reformed leaders. The goddess's expression grew serious. But reformation is never finished. New forms of exploitation emerge. Systems require maintenance. Cultural values need constant reinforcement. The work continues because the alternative, returning to societies that normalized abuse, is unacceptable. She raised her hand, and new plaques materialized beside the memorial stone, honoring the achievements of the past 25 years while acknowledging work remaining. To another 25 years of transformation, the goddess proclaimed, to continued protection of sacred bonds, to societies that value all beings regardless of power or status, to eternal vigilance against exploitation in all its forms, to reformation. The gathered beings responded in unison. As the formal ceremony concluded, I found myself surrounded by wolves whose lives had been changed by 25 years of systemic transformation. Jenny, leading global protection efforts with the confidence of someone who'd healed from trauma and used that healing to help others. Alice, whose healing abilities were now employed training recovery specialists across supernatural communities. Suzanne, coordinating survivor advocacy that had helped nearly 1 million beings process trauma and reclaim agency. And even Todd, now 70 years old and having spent 25 years in supervised consultation work, teaching investigators how predators operate while living with permanent uncertainty about whether his reformation was genuine. 25 years, Todd said quietly, and standing beside me as we observed the gathering. I've spent more time trying to prevent exploitation than I spent committing it. Does that balance the scales? No, I said honestly. Nothing balances destroying 6 wolves' lives and teaching tactics that destroy dozens more. But it demonstrates commitment to being different. That's what matters. He nodded slowly. I'll probably spend the rest of my life wondering if I've actually changed or just learned to perform redemption convincingly. As the uncertainty never fades. Good. Certainty about your own virtue is what created the predator you used to be. Permanent uncertainty might be what keeps you honest. He smiled bitterly. Philosophical torment as rehabilitation. The moon goddess is creative. She's effective. As twilight fell over the memorial garden, Raziel and I found a quiet spot overlooking the gathering. 25 years of reformation, he said. From one investigation to global transformation. That's remarkable. It's insufficient, I said reflexively, then smiled at his expression. But also remarkable. Both things can be true. Always the director, he teased gently, always the realist who refuses to settle for good enough when better is possible. We stood in comfortable silence, watching supernatural beings from across communities celebrating shared commitment to protecting sacred bonds. 25 years ago, these communities had been isolated, each dealing with exploitation privately, each thinking their problems were unique. Now they collaborated, shared strategies, supported each other through reformation challenges. United by understanding that exploitation patterns transcended species and that systemic solutions required cooperation. The goddess is planning the next phase, Raziel said eventually, expansion beyond supernatural communities. I turned to him. You mean human populations? They have their own versions of bond exploitation, domestic violence, coercive control, systemic abuse hidden in relationship dynamics. Different terminology, same fundamental patterns. The scope was staggering. Reforming supernatural communities had taken 25 years and counting. Expanding to human populations, billions of beings across countless cultures, would require centuries. That's beyond ambitious, I said. That's attempting to transform civilization itself. Yes, but you've proven it's possible. Raziel's expression was serious. 25 years ago, Werewolf Society thought mate bond exploitation was inevitable. Now we've gone 18 months without a single death. If that transformation is possible in supernatural communities, why not human ones? He was right. The fundamental work was the same. Exposing exploitation patterns, building protection systems, reforming governance, shifting cultural values, supporting survivors. And the specifics differed across species and communities, but the core principles remained consistent. We'd need human partners, I said, mind already calculating requirements. Can't impose celestial authority on mortal populations the way we can with supernatural communities. Would require working within existing human systems, influencing rather than commanding. The goddess has already identified potential partners, human organizations working on domestic violence prevention, coercive control awareness, relationship education. They've been doing similar work to ours, just without divine backing. When does she want to start? Next year. Give us time to stabilize current supernatural reforms, then begin pilot programs in select human communities. I looked out at the memorial garden, at the 127 names that would glow for eternity, then at the thousands of beings celebrating 25 years of transformation. Then at the future stretching before us. Decades more work, expanding to human populations, attempting to create a world where sacred bonds of all kinds were actually protected. It was overwhelming, impossible, absolutely necessary. Let's do it, I said, because somewhere in the human world, someone was experiencing exploitation right now. Being told their worth depended on another's approval. Being isolated, criticized, gaslit into believing abuse was normal. And if 25 years of reformation had taught me anything, it was that systemic change, while slow and difficult, was always worth pursuing. One investigation, one intervention, one survivor finding their voice, one community reformed, one culture transformed. Multiply that across decades and species and populations, and eventually you change civilization itself. That was worth everything.